Welcome to Soul Night Live, episode number 91. Tonight, our guest is Luthier Dave Onorato.
Tonight, I'm taking this show on the road. I'm hanging out with my friend Dave Onorato, local luthier here in Atlanta, Georgia. We're going to give you some tips on guitar care, guitar buying, and a whole lot more. So, good to see you, Dave.
Yeah, good to see you, man.
Good to have
That's
you.
right. Yeah,
It's good to take this show on the road. It's the first time out of 90 episodes.
that's great.
I've left the house.
All right. Well, we're under 100, so it's the limited edition.
That's right. So I think this will be the first of many.
Yeah.
I can actually see myself, popping in and interviewing people
definitely.
right before they hit the stage. So
Yeah.
we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
But so anyhow, if Dave looks familiar, you may have seen him on Rick Beato's excellent channel. There's a series they do called the Three Amigos, where you and Rick and Rhett get together and kind of have shootouts about different things, be it amp gauges or string gauges, amps, you name it.
Guitars, everything. We just kind of it's sort of the round table of the three morons. Everybody's got a little different opinion on stuff, so we all have a little different view on stuff. We all it's usually we usually talk about gear or maybe music stuff, depending on what we're doing at the time. But most of it's off the cuff, so we really don't have a script or anything. So we just kind of get in the room and we're like, yeah, what do you want to talk about?
Sure.
If it's something of the day or something like that, or some new gear that one of us got or whatever. Or people ask us, I do get, we all get questions from people say, hey, next time you do video, why don't you do this? And so every once in a while it'll turn into, oh, I had this guy tell me, how to do it. And so we'll do a video on whatever, somebody wants to hear about. So, but yeah, we try to keep it fresh and just, like I said, there's not a script or not,
Well, I like the subjects. I think one of my favorite episodes is one where they compared different string gauges.
Yeah.
And, because there's kind of a myth that, the thicker the string, the better the tone. And I think you guys kind of shot a hole in that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was kind of one of those things where it really got started between me and Rick. We were talking about guitar setups at the time. And I kept playing, a lot of my guitars had 8s and 9s on it. And he would set his stuff up with a little heavier gauge because he would do a lot of detune stuff for a lot of bands that he was working for. And then I think after a while we started talking about, all those big strings, they don't necessarily make this guitar sound better. In fact, it was just the opposite with some guitars. We put lighter gauge strings on it and we're like, oh, this sounds great now. And these bigger strings don't. So it kind of got the ball rolling and then we all got involved with it. And I was always the one saying, well, Hendrix used 8s, Jeff Beck, the slew of everybody who had 8s in the 70s. And I'm like, well, none of their tones sucked. So.
Right. And even Stevie Ray didn't use 13s. It kind of depended on what his hands felt like at any given time.
He would vary. And as I was saying before about, I was real good friends with his old tech, Cesar Diaz. He was a good friend of my dad's and I knew him as a kid. And he would say, even like Stevie would start the tour with heavy gauge strings, like 12s, 13s. But by the end of some of the tours, his hands were hurting so bad that he would actually get to like a 10. And he was playing at E flat. So 10s at E flat, that's quite a bit different than having 13s. So,
sure, yeah.
I've always said it's in the hands, personally. I think it's in the hands. But we tried to prove that somewhat. And I think we did a little bit.
Well, my takeaway, if I remember correctly, was that the thinner strings actually produced a tighter bottom end.
Yeah.
And
I think that's totally the case. Yeah. Definitely.
If you're playing metal or something like that, then you might want to go that route.
But you have to adjust your technique quite a bit. That's the other thing we found. Most people were like, well, I don't play light strings because I'm such a heavy hand that I pull it out of tune. So you definitely have to adjust for it. Especially playing metal, it's detuned metal on light strings is tough because you got so much. It's so floppy that most people wouldn't probably go that route.
It's almost like they want it to be like a steel cable when they're
picking. So they get a lot of resistance and they can get really quick, right hand stuff. But it's interesting though because it kind of ran the gamut with that video. We really didn't think it was going to be that big of a thing, and it sort of blew up, and we're all just like, oh, it was cool, And we got tons of mail from all over the world from different people, and I still get people saying, oh, I went to 8s because of you, and I'm like, well, I guess that's a good thing. I don't know, but I did laugh in the fact that recently though I have seen a lot of string companies and dealerships carry 8s now. since all of that kind of happened. And I'm not saying we were direct, responsible for that, but I do know, like, even locally, some of the shops that I visit, they were like, man, we started stocking 8s and we started selling them because of that video. And I was like, oh, cool. So it was kind of interesting.
And, I think they'd be great for beginners too. I mean,
sure. Yeah, to keep, especially, somebody who has small hands and can't, really grab big strings. Yeah, I definitely would suggest
definitely start there. Yeah. So,
and it also helps your technique too. I mean, you have to play lighter, so you're not quite as heavy-handed, which in some cases can be better.
Unless you're an animal.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, hey, I'm not gonna lie. I'm definitely a heavy hand, so I have to adjust my technique quite a bit. But it was interesting. It was a fun video, and I'm glad we had it.
Yeah, I never would have thought to have a side-by-side comparison like that, but it was
pretty
enlightening.
And some of the gauges were harder to decipher between the two. I think 8 to 9 was pretty hard to figure out. You definitely heard like 8 to 10, 8 to 11. You could hear a lot of the difference there. But the 8s and 9s are very close in a lot of the tonality.
What's your preference for string brand? Are they created equal, or would you say?
No, I definitely don't think they're equal. Personally, I've used GHS boomers for, 40 years.
Sure.
And it's not even a thing of maybe the tonality so much. It's they tend to be a little brighter, but it's just a feel that they have on the wrap that I really like in the low strings.
Mm-hmm.
They're a little, they're not quite a sharp feeling to me, like as maybe like a D'Addario or Ernie Ball or even some of the other like John Pierce and elixirs and stuff like that. Yeah. So
I'm gonna try. I used to use those when I first started playing, and then a friend turned me on to Ernie Balls, and I've used them ever since. And I think I need to.
It's funny though, it's not a diehard thing. If I can't get JHS, I'll go buy Ernie Balls or something.
Right.
But there are differences in the companies for sure.
How do you feel about what they're made of, like nickel versus steel?
I personally like the solid nickel ones. To me,
is it a tone thing, or is it more about how long they last?
It's a tone thing more than anything with the nickel. I have a chemical makeup where like literally I can get 1 gig out of a set of strings and they gotta go. And it's not that they're rusted, it's just that the alloy for some reason just dulls really quickly.
Sure.
And I'm not a fan of coated strings personally, so I don't do coated. I know a lot of people do, and it's fine. It's just personally for me, I don't like the way they feel. They have a strange feel to me. So I just I buy the boomers in bulk, and I actually they have like a 6-pack that I buy, and I think $30 for 6 sets. So,
sure.
And they haven't, as far as the JHS, I'm pretty consistent for everything I've used.
Remember those days where they used to just send you a ream of every gauge?
Yeah. The bulk strings. Yeah. In fact, I used to buy D'Addario like that for my shop, and it's a great way to buy strings. The problem is though, they oxidize very quickly.
So you better use them.
So you got to really go through them. And they don't, usually it's 100 strings to one.
So the fact that they put these in little plastic bags that are airtight makes a
big
difference when it comes to longevity. Right,
exactly.
Nice packaging, man.
Yeah, so, but no, I have good luck with GHS. Ernie Balls are always pretty consistent. D'Addario is the same. Now, there are some small companies like String Joy out of Nashville that I just tried a couple sets from those guys, and they were really nice sounding strings, and they seem to hold up well. They were double the price. So I guess in that fact that, if I didn't maybe go through strings quite as much as I do, I'd probably go with something like that.
Yeah.
Or an elixir maybe or something like that. But I had some good luck with Stringjoy stuff, and they seem like really nice guys up there. And it's a local Nashville shop, so they hand do everything up there, which is kind of cool.
Sure.
There's another guy, Kurt Menigan, who does some great strings. I've tried his stuff, and I've had really good luck with those. As far as electrics. Acoustics, it's strange. I'm kind of all over the place on acoustics because it really just depends on the acoustic itself. I get a lot of guitars for the shop here, and I'll have people say, "Well, I only use 1 string on this guitar," which is fine. But I've actually in the shop while working on the guitar would use a different set of strings, and the guitar would sound completely different.
Right.
And it would either sound way better or worse, but it would definitely. So to me, obviously, the acoustic strings are much more, to my ear, important as far as what you're putting on.
Is there a particular brand you like?
It kind of depends on the guitar. I some of the D'Addarios are nice, and I like Kurt Minigan makes some good ones. John Pierce, I like John Pierce.
How about the Martin strings?
I'm not a fan of the Martins, and I've tried them on a lot of guitars.
Yeah.
What I found, and it's just all this is personal. So I mean,
Right.
obviously, I'm not trashing anybody, but we all have our preferences. So
Sure.
they just don't seem, for me, they don't seem to last very long.
Okay.
They really dull quickly. Like
Wow.
the high end and mid range tend to really go quickly.
That's kind of the litmus test for me. Is like,
Yeah.
how long can this sound fresh? You know?
Yeah, right.
So that's good to know. Okay.
But as far as quality wise, the Martin strings are fine.
Yeah.
And so
Those seem to be the most easy ones to find. You go to a store
Right.
and that's
they're
what you
usually
find
right.
first,
It's usually
you know?
Martin, no matter what, on acoustics or
Right.
Diodaria. Those seems to
Right.
be the two. And if I had to choose, I'd go with the Diodaria. I've had better luck. So
Okay. Well, that's
phosphor
good.
bronze typically is what I go for.
Okay.
80-20.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you met Rick. I mean, I figured folks might recognize you from that channel. And,
Yeah. Well, actually, I've known Rick since it's kind of funny. We've tried to figure out exactly what year it was. I think it was '92 when I moved here in '90 to Atlanta from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I came here to go to GIT, which turned into Atlanta Institute of Music.
So you're a Midwesterner at heart?
Yeah, Tulsa,
So
Oklahoma.
I'm a Kansas boy.
Oh, okay,
So-
there you go, man. I used to go to Wichita and Kansas City all the time and buy guitars and the flattest state in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well,
But I met Rick I think in '92. I first met him at I was working at a shop here in town. It was called Famous Bargain Music. It was up on Roswell Road, and he came in one day and just I was working there and. He sat down and started playing, and I'm just instantly like, who the hell is on playing this guitar? Any good player that came in, I was like, yeah, cool.
Sure,
Man.
it's
So,
like, yeah.
and I started playing, and and I was like, man, I was like, who are you playing with? And he said, well, I just moved here from Rochester, and so I'm looking to hook up with bands and stuff. So we just kind of hit it right off because he was from up north, and I could tell we listened to a lot of same stuff. He was a Matheny head and like a lot of jazz stuff, and
Sure.
and then at the time, there was bands like King's X and Stone Temple Pilots and all that stuff were really popular. So we were all into that. But so we just kind of hit it off, and then I was later started working at a studio here in town, Triclops Studios, and it was about a year later after that I started working there, and he actually came in with his band to do a demo. And we had a really nice Neve console and two-inch steer machines, and we had cut like Siamese Dream, and we did a Jason Bonham record there, and Warren Haynes' first solo record. Just a lot of really good stuff. And in fact, we were doing one of Yngwie Malmsteen's records at the time. When
Wow,
The
man.
Seventh Sign.
Okay,
And,
very cool.
yeah, it was an eclectic mix of what we cut in there. It was like one day we had the Georgia Satellites, the next day Yngwie's in there, and then the next day we had the Indigo Girls. So it was a strange mix.
Yeah, that's quite the mix.
Yeah, so it was interesting, but yeah, Rick came in with the band, and they scoped out the place, and so we just kind of kept in touch from there, and then later on when he started getting into production stuff, he started doing bands and doing producing, and so he called me up one time and said, hey, I've got some session work, would you come in and kind of do some session stuff for me? And I was like, yeah, sure, of course, and on top of this, hey, I need guitars repaired. So it was like,
Right.
yeah, okay, and so he would call me up, and I would go do stuff for him, and it was just typically rock stuff, and some of the stuff I worked on was one of those things where we didn't tell the band, and then some of what we did, I don't know, I just showed up, and he just said, hey man, here, do
A
this.
bit of ghosting.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So which happens quite
It
a bit.
happens.
Yeah, of course. Hey. But it was always. I knew it was always going to be a good session though, because he usually would call me. He knew my style, which is more of a blues-based hard rock kind of thing, and so he would call me and say, hey, I need this or whatever, and so he wouldn't call me up and say, hey, I've got some industrial Madonna record you gonna play. It was always some
Right.
hard rock stuff.
Sure.
So he knew I could. It was my wheelhouse. So.
Sure.
And I'd come in and he dubbed me One Take Dave, because I would come in and he would just roll something and say, man, I need you to play a solo here, do this, and most of the time I would nail it first run. And a lot of times he wouldn't even tell me he was recording. I'd be tuning up playing, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I got some of that. And I was like, okay, whatever, So
Yeah.
it was fun. So we just kind of hit it off for there, and then he went out to LA and did a bunch of stuff after that, and I stayed here, and I got into Zach Brown's band for a couple of years, and then I did some. I was doing a lot of guitar repair work, and then, of course during this whole time I would buy and sell vintage stuff and used guitars and stuff too. So I worked at stores, and I did repair, and then I played in bands. So I did everything.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and this is long before the YouTube.
Yeah, this would have been
YouTube.
Yeah, this would have been 90s and then he went to LA in early 2000s and then came back, and then about 7 years ago, he just said, "Man, I'm tired of producing. I don't want to do this stuff anymore." And he just said, "I think I'm going to do some videos, and would you be interested in doing some?" And we kind of just sort of like, "Yeah, sure, let's try it, And then Rhett started working for Rick at his studio as an intern, and that's where I met Rhett. And so we all just kind of hit it off, and it was one of those things where Rick just sort of said, we thought we had good banter from everybody. We kind of did a couple trial run videos, and we all just sort of fell right into it. It was one of those things like he just rolled camera, we just did it, and we're like, yeah, this is great,
Sure.
So,
yeah.
and it was one of those things where we always try to keep it to where. At least I do. I try to keep it to where it's just like three guys in their living room talking gear or whatever.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's just low key, lo-fi, and fun, and you don't
the
get
gist of this show as well.
Yeah, right. You don't get this sort of snobbery thing, or you don't kind of like, or it's not super high production. It's just like, man, we're just hanging out and just talking shop, and like I said, the good thing we all have different opinions on stuff. We're kind of in the same vein, but we all have a little different take on stuff,
Sure.
So, and it's just due to age, I think. Rick's the oldest, I'm in the middle, and Brett's younger, so it all kind of works out.
Sure.
And we're all into the same basic stuff. So we, Brett's maybe a little more into the newer stuff as far as newer brand new equipment. And Rick is too. I'm more the old school guy, but I also like new stuff too. So kind of.
Yeah. Well, it's a great channel. I mean, Rick Beato's channel is really the premier channel to get musical talk on YouTube. So if you haven't checked it out, swing by and subscribe and check it out. And you'll see Dave on there again in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Not before too long.
In fact, we'll be doing some more videos, I'm sure, pretty soon. We just haven't done a lot of it just because of the COVID stuff, but everything's kind of getting back on track now. So.
It'd be great to see you guys play sometime.
Well, we've done a few videos where we did do some playing, and so I know we all have kind of talked about wanting to do it a little bit more, and it's just more of a scheduling thing than anything. But it'll happen. I know it'll happen.
I would just think with the audience that you have now, it'd be a great time to do some original music, because I think suddenly, there's thousands of people that know you.
And the good thing about it is, there's a few other musicians that are kind of in the circle with us. Jason Tiller, who's a vocalist who we've done some videos on Brick's channel with, who's a phenomenal singer. The guy, he's one of those guys who literally can throw anything at him. He can pretty much nail it.
Nice.
So we did like a top 10 video one time with a bunch of different songs in it, from like Journey to, it was all these anthems, rock anthems.
Right.
And he can nail it all. I mean, it's pretty crazy to watch him do it. And he's one of those guys just off the cuff. Like, he could sell. He just turns that switch, and it's like, okay, you need Paul Stanley. Okay, you need Pearl Jam. You need whatever. I mean, he'll just
like a rich little rock.
Yeah. And it's crazy because really, like, his voice to me is his own real voice is very sort of a Bob Seger kind of lower range, but real gruff and real bluesy, which I love. And then we've got a slew of drummers that Rick works with too, and keyboard players. So it's cool. It's like we have a band in some form or fashion. It's just putting it all together. But I'm sure we will. And of course, Rhett has his bands. He's got a lot of bands that he does on his channel that are great. I highly suggest watching his stuff too. It's great stuff. So
what's his channel called? Is it?
He's just Rhett Shaw. And I think he's forgive me for not knowing all of it. I know he's Instagram, he's got YouTube, he's got all Facebook too, so it's Rhett Shaw. And he does gear reviews, he does stuff from on the road. He put 2 or 3 of his bands that he's in up until recently were touring bands. So he would do a lot of stuff, videos from on tour, on the gig, on the show.
Sure.
And it was great because So he would totally, like get a new amp. And he goes, well, I'm going to put it through its paces tonight at the gig. And, and we're talking like festival gigs. So they were like, couple thousand people there on some of these, and he's like, yeah, I tried my AC30 tonight and it was great, and this is why, and so it was cool. Yeah, he does some really great videos. And his camera work and video work are amazing. I love the way he films stuff. It looks really pro. So nothing like
It's got to be better than this.
Well, there's genius in both ends.
That's right.
So
there's genius and simplicity.
That's right.
And we're tapping into that today.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. So, tell us a bit about being a luthier and what does it take to be? I mean, is there such a thing as being certified as one, or is it just something you kind of
certifiedly crazy, maybe,
right?
for doing it? Well, no, there are schools and that you can go to.
Yeah, I lived in Phoenix back in the early '90s, and my roommate went to Roberto Venz.
Yeah, it was a very famous school.
Yeah, it's like one of the few back then, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there was only only a couple. There was the Apprentice Shop. There was that one, and there was one or two in California, and there was those were the only ones that I knew of at the time. It's weird. I get asked this question a lot, and it's one of those things where I started working on guitars really early. So I was one of those kids where just a quick backstory. My dad had a shop for years. I grew up in his shop, so it was always
a music store.
Yeah, my dad had a guitar shop in Ohio for just about 7 years, and then when we moved to Tulsa, we had a shop for about 10 years. It was mainly more of a vintage guitar shop per se. It was more geared toward guitars and basses. We did drums and other things, but it was mainly a guitar shop.
Right.
And so I was, my job as a kid was, restringing guitars and watching my dad put pickups in and learn how to cut nuts and frets and all that kind of stuff. So I learned on hands-on. Basically he would just hand me junk guitars and say, here, go for it, try that, and so I learned that, started that way, and I was always the person where not only am I a player, but I'm really interested in the guitar itself, how to make it sound better, play better, so I was always tinkering with stuff, and of course, one of my big idols was Van Halen. So watching him build his own guitar and put all that together was fascinating to me. Brian May and these guys.
Did you build your own first guitar?
Or? No, I did build some. My third and fourth guitars were guitars that I built. But my first guitar was I had a '66 Fender Duosonic. Dakota Red, that was kind of cool, and then my dad brought home a refinished '56 Strat, and that became a second guitar.
Nice. Okay.
And then that guitar got sold, and I traded that in for, I don't know why, a Memphis Strat copy that was 3-tone sunburst that I thought was cool and was absolutely.
Well, we all have the guitars like that.
Yeah, it was like yeah, and I think my dad actually wanted the Strat for the '56 Strat for a customer, so I think he sold it. Yeah,
I get it.
But I got a Memphis. So then after the Memphis, I got a Charvel, which I still have, a '77 Charvel, and that guitar came sort of in pieces when I got it. The guy traded it in, and it's an original pre-pro Strat, and the body was in one hand, the neck was in the other. The guy brought it in. He had dismantled it and tried to put it back together and didn't know how to do it, so he brought it in to my dad. And my dad said, well, yeah, we put it together, but it's going to be this much money. He said, oh, well, I'll just get another guitar,
Okay.
And so he bought I think he bought another Strat. So I got this Charvel body and neck as a kid. And instantly, I knew what it was because I was a Van Halen freak at like age 8. So I was like, oh my God, this is a real Charvel. And yeah, at that time, it really wasn't that big a deal where we were. But like if you were in California, Charvel was a big deal. But this guitar, I don't know how it ended up in the East Coast, but it did. And so I took it home, and that was like my Frankenstein Strat. I routed it for humbuckers, and I put different pots in it and all kinds of necks, bridges, and I mean, you name it. The guitar's been rebuilt like 100 times.
How much do pots affect the tone?
It can quite a bit, actually.
Really?
Yeah,
going from like 500 to what are the different?
Well, there's anything from like 250 to 500K 1 meg pots. Depends on the pickups that you have, but yeah, the pots can really change the sound of a guitar. If you think of it in layman's terms, it's kind of like what's the difference between a 2-barrel carburetor and a 4-barrel carburetor? It's how much dampening is being done in the pot.
Well, yeah.
you know,
Well, I
so-
almost wonder if some of them have a bit of a governor effect, where
Oh,
it's
they
kind
do.
of holding it back.
Sure.
And if
Yeah.
you just got that out of the way, the guitar. Would
Depending
come
on the
through clear.
pickups that you have, yeah. I mean, you can. I like personally, I use the pots that I use recently, as of maybe in the last 5 years. I really like the Seymour Duncan Bourne's made pots, which are, they have a real nice sweep in them, and they're very linear sounding, and they don't affect the tone. They're really transparent sounding to me. So I use their 500Ks in anything I have in the humbucker, and I've been really happy with those. And then they make a 250K version of it too for singles. But yeah, the pots can totally affect it. Yeah.
How about all that tone stuff that it goes through? I mean, I've seen some guitars where they skip that completely.
Yeah.
And
Personally, I wire all my Strats with just a volume knob and a switch. I don't put a tone control in
because
it at
the
all.
tone, I'm always full up. I'm not really.
Yeah,
one to-
it's funny. There's kind of basically there's two players. There's a player who doesn't use it at all, and then there's the other guy who constantly uses it.
Right.
So I'm just one of those ones. I'm flat out just use a volume, and then my worst case scenario is I basically put a treble bleed cap on my volume pot, so when I roll it back, it stays clean.
Okay.
It doesn't get dark as it goes down as I
Right.
back it off. Which basically just acts like a tone control, sort of.
Right.
Yeah. But no, tone controls and caps can totally affect the signal, and usually a lot of guys and girls who come into my shop and have guitars are like, oh, I really don't use the tone pots. I'll say, well, here, why don't we bypass them and see how you like it? 9 times out of 10, they're like, oh my God, it's great, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just very rare that I want that kind of,
Yeah.
really cloudy kind of sound.
Yeah,
I mean, it's nice for some things, but
yeah,
it's rare. So yeah, I wouldn't really miss it.
No, and most people don't. And then but like I said, there's two kinds of players. So I always ask people like, well, if you're constantly using tone control, leave it in there, and we can do some other things to adjust.
I've seen
for
people
it.
use it in a clever. I've even seen guys use it like almost like a wah wah.
Yeah,
Sure. It's like
Oh, yeah.
if you're quick.
Yeah, well, and depending on the cap you use on the tone control, you can get it to actually mimic a wah pedal by using different caps. So you can actually
kind of useful.
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you're
yeah.
into that kind of
yeah.
twist it with your pinky.
Yeah,
kind of
right.
thing while
Grab
you're
it in the middle
playing,
and do that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But you can get like a mid-sweep sound, sort of a wah, effect if you got the right cap in one. So
That'd be handy.
actually, Zappa did that early on with some of his Strats, and he had different caps in there on top of a billion other things. But
Right.
he would have a mid-sweep that he could roll back and forth and get the hollowed out
Sure.
sounds with. So.
Another thing I wanted to talk about was something that most people probably don't think much about is picks.
Mhm.
It seems like most of us find a favorite kind of pick and we just kind of use it for life.
Yeah.
But, sometimes changing your pick can be a real revelation when it comes to
Sure. Oh, definitely.
technique things. And
Definitely.
know.
Yeah, I mean, we all fall into our ruts where we like what we like.
I
and we
like
kind of
my
get
green
comfortable.
Tortex,
Yeah, I'm a purple Tortex guy or a
Yeah.
Clayton, something like
Yeah.
that. But no, definitely, it can totally affect it. And I for a while, like I kind of got on a kick with the Jazz 3 stubby picks for a
the
while, little tiny
pumpkin
ones.
seed
Little
kinda
tiny
guys.
ones, and it was
Yeah.
strictly because I wanted to get my right hand technique a little more accurate than it was. I was getting a little too sloppy, and I was kind of like, all right, well, I got to be really articulate if I'm going to use this pick.
Right.
And it did work, and it helped me. So I did it for about 6 months, and I got rid of those and went back to the other pick, and it did help. So,
Okay.
so sometimes even just doing something like that, and not even in effect of actually playing gigs with it, just sitting in front of TV and just goofing off. But try a different pick and see if you can start getting some different ideas.
Yeah, I think people just never think to do that, and it's
Yeah.
like the simplest thing you can do.
Yeah, definitely, and also
they're cheap. I mean, it's
Yeah.
easy to go buy a whole bunch of different kinds, and,
Sure.
and so try it out.
yeah, I always tell people to experiment because it's the happy accidents that usually are the best things. Even there again with the string gauge. Hey, it's like $5-10 for a set of strings. Go spend $20, get 4 different sets of strings, and throw it on your guitar and see what you like.
Right.
I mean, it's
And it's these are simple things
Yeah.
that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
So
and
definitely,
definitely picks and no picks.
Yeah.
Finger picking
Yeah,
to me,
use your-
that was
I think that's kind of half the fun of playing the guitar
Yeah.
is using your fingers.
right.
you
Right.
know, So
Yeah, I was a huge Martin Knopfler fan. So early on, I played with no pick for a long time. Albert King the same way. I was a huge Albert King fan. So they always played with just their fingers.
Sure.
And you get a totally different tone, a different tack, and it's just, to me, I really go back between the two quite a bit. So
I think for me it was just being young and broke and not be able to find a pick some days.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of went from there. And then
Well, you just have to look in your dryer.
Yeah, of course. You have the black hole of Calcutta, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I just used to ask my mom where all my picks were. She's like, "Oh, they're in the dryer." I'm like, "Yeah, okay."
Of course, yeah. It's, you have a little bowl there.
Yeah, exactly.
By the dryer for all that. And she gets to keep the change.
Oh, yeah.
That's part of the deal.
It's probably quite a bit that we made, but anyway, that's about all I had.
So the answer is you can go to a school for Luthier.
Yes,
but
you can.
Not necessarily. It's not necessarily.
Well,
only
the way I
route
look
you
at it,
take.
if you, it's like I tell everybody, whether it's guitar playing or working on guitars, if you have a passion for it, if you really like just sit there and like taking your guitar apart and messing with it and getting into it, then go try to do it. You know, if you're kind of one of those people where it's like, well, I really don't want to mess with it, and I'm not really, you know what? You got to be 2 feet all the way in
Right.
to do it, because it is. I will say it can be very frustrating. There are a lot of stuff on the, there's a lot of stuff on the net now, which, when I first got into this,
Right.
you had maybe 2 or 3 books, and you basically had to, if you had maybe one good repair guy in the town you lived in, you'd go hang out at his shop and kind of pump him for some info.
Right.
And be like, hey, I got this problem, and he would either show you, or he'd be like, well, here, I'll show it. You're going to pay me. I'll show you how to do it,
Right.
and then you can go try to do it. But now you've got everywhere you go, from Stu Mac to Luther's Mercantile to, there's all kinds of different
Sure.
stuff.
I mean, there's everything that you can do to a guitar. There's probably a video out there on
YouTube.
YouTube.
But there again, but then you have the other problem of like, what's good, what isn't. I've seen a lot of videos by guys where I'm like, that's,
I wouldn't do that.
yeah, that's not something. So you always have to take it with a grain of salt. But I would say if you have a passion to take stuff apart and fix and just get into it, and then you're halfway there.
Right. Well, how much do you think people should learn to do on their own?
I always suggest, like, the 2 or 3 people that I've had over the years who are friends of mine who are like, I really want to get into this. I would say, okay, go buy a $129 Squire or some junker, not something that's a total basket case that is going to be too hard to work on.
Right.
But get something that's already playable, but maybe could use help. So like a $75, $100 beginner guitar.
Right.
Typically get a Strat or a Tele, because you can get parts all over the place for
Sure.
it. And just start from there and go, learn how to polish frets, how to make the nut, better, replace pickups,
Right.
pots, that kind of thing, and just do it. And so, and as you go, if you, the more you do it, the better you get at it, and then the more you also realize what you need work on. Like I mean. I know for me, like, fret work and nut work was, I don't know why it kind of came sort of easy to me. I mean, I just got it. I don't know. It was one of those things, like, I did about 5 or 6 guitars, and then actually let me try a real guitar.
Right.
And do it. And I did it okay. And I got, okay. So and it's repetition, and it's just, doing it over and over. But I would say, yeah, just get like a $100 Squire or something like that, and take it apart, and just say, worst case scenario, you're not going to screw something up that's too expensive.
Right.
But the good thing about it is, if you learn on that and you get good on it, you actually turn that guitar into something that's actually probably a pretty decent player.
Right.
And then it gives you the confidence to go do, okay, let me try a $300 guitar.
Sure.
Let me try a $500 guitar. Let me try that. And just go from there.
Okay.
Or the good thing about the day we live in now. If you want to bypass some of that, you could call Warmoth up and buy a Warmoth neck,
Buy the
a
parts
body.
and put a guitar together.
Basically, you can put a whole guitar together. Even if you really don't know what you're doing, you can pretty much do 85% of it by bolting it together and watching videos. And then the last 20%, probably
The
have
electronics and all that.
Yeah. Have somebody else do it. So that's a good, and that's not as cheap maybe as a way to do it, but you could still, you can put a nice Warmoth Strat together or Tele or something like that for less than $1,000, and by the time you get done with it, depending on how you option it out, you got a guitar that's every bit as good as an American Standard Strat or something like that, and you can say, yeah, well, I put this together, and that's kind of a part of it too.
It's going to mean more to you after going through all that.
Sure.
than
I
just
could
buying
definitely
something off
say,
the shelf.
guitars that I worked on early on that I rebuilt and I was proud of. It was the accomplishment of like, yeah, man, I actually did this, So
Sure, yeah.
but and the other thing is, don't be afraid to fail, because you're gonna fail.
Right.
You're gonna screw something up. It's just par for the course.
So this is for a luthier in training, basically.
Yeah.
Now, how about just an average guitar owner? I'd say that, out of all the things you know how to do, knowing how to intonate it is probably one of the things that it's pretty easy to do, that you could do yourself without screwing things up too much.
Yeah, you really can't do too much harm. I mean, I would say the three things that, if you just want basic good guitar maintenance, that you can learn easily. Learn how to intonate your guitar, and learn how to intonate your guitar in different tunings too, not just maybe one tuning. Like do multiple tunings, so you can kind of see how it works, how to really use a strobe tuner, and how to really dial in, be finite with it. What I find with a lot of people is they'll intonate. They say they intonate a guitar, but they'll kind of get close, and close is good enough. But if as a guitar player, good enough is still out of tune.
Right.
So the intonation, if you get good at it, you can really keep your guitar in tune.
Oh yeah, and that's so nice when it's really on the money. You can,
right.
It just.
I mean, there's a lot of variables that affect it. I mean, as far as the condition of the frets, the way the nuts cut, and all that. But if you just take a new, like you go out and buy a regular production line guitar and just intonate it, you should be able to get it pretty much right.
And this is something people need to be aware of, because if you go changing the gauge of your strings, then you got to re-intonate.
Yeah, any kind of string change, tuning, if
not just change it. I mean, once you pick a gauge and use it over and over, you don't have to. But if you go from like 9s to 11s, you're definitely
you need to re-intonate and probably readjust the neck too.
Right.
So.
And the neck, now the truss rod, I always feel like that's kind of a no-no kind of area unless you really know what you're doing.
Well, the thing with truss rods, what you don't want to do is just don't want to over tighten it. That's the biggest thing.
Right.
So what I usually tell people, if you're, if you think the neck is bowed, or you can see down the neck that the neck is bowed out, whether it's back bowed or bowed concave.
Right.
The truss rod, depending on the truss rod you have, the two-way truss rod works both ways, but most guitars are single action truss rods, typically. So you can only go right or left, right's tight, left's loose. So if you go to the right and you start getting a lot of resistance and you got to really crank, then stop.
Then you've reached its limit.
Right.
Right.
And then back off of it and see how straight it is. If it's still like you got it tight and you got a bad bow in it, well, you're going to need to probably refret the neck, because you got a bow in it.
Well, I just wanted to ask about it. It's like when you're intonating, it seems like sometimes you get that saddle all the way back and you still haven't got where you need to be.
Yeah.
Is that when you tweak the neck? Is that the next
that
step?
can be part of it, or it could be that the actual, depending on the guitar, the bridge could be in the wrong spot. You might actually have to physically move the bridge back or forward, depending. And that's not out of the question, because I've done quite a lot of those. And they're typically on cheaper guitars,
right?
Because they're just manufacturing really quick and getting them out the door. And sometimes they're not, the alignment's off and that kind of thing.
Now, how do you feel about the bridges? We have, that's a Gibson. That's a good example. But on a Fender, you have your typical basic ones that are kind of shaped like that. And then on the nicer ones, you have this nice kind of block, kind of square kind of piece.
Yes.
Is the block better? Is it more precise, or?
Well, the curved one that you're talking about was actually original design from the 50s.
The original. Yeah. I mean, that's still.
It has a pretty hard break angle where the string actually goes over the top of the saddle, which can be a breaking point depending on if the break angle and if there's maybe a burr in the saddle.
Right.
It would actually break the string.
Sure.
I like the block saddles better personally for two reasons. I think they feel better in your hand. You don't shred your hand as much.
Right.
And the block saddles to me actually are more stable. They don't move around as much, and you've got the blocks are next to each other, and you don't get a lot of this. Right. And they tend to me to sound a little better too, just because there's more mass there.
Okay.
So I like the block saddles personally.
But they don't really intonate better than the
No, in fact, they can
ones.
be, depending on the bridge, they can actually be harder to intonate, because you've got more saddle there and less play and less, as far as the screw with, as far as how far you can go back and forward. But intonation, it's one of those things where a lot of times what I find, it's trying to find the happy medium between your picking technique and your playing technique, string gauge, and then action height. Most of the time, you can have just as an example, you can have like a Strat or a Telly set up really well. But depending on how the person plays it and digs into it, plays it, they pull the guitar out of tune even though it's in tune. Mm-hmm. And it has to do with how big the frets are, how hard they push down on the frets against the neck. So it's kind of like, I try to have, when I have clients come in, I have them play so I can actually watch them play. Typically, if they're saying I have intonation problems with this guitar, I'll actually have them sit down and I'll watch them play guitar.
Okay.
Just to see how they're playing it too, because because I've done guitars where I know the guitar's in tune, I know it's perfectly as good as it's going to get, and you hand it to them and they go, I played at the gig and it's out of tune, and I'm like, okay, well, let me see how you're really playing this thing, right? Because 9 times out of 10 it's typically pilot error, which I hate to say, but it's just error. Yeah. So I usually have to tell them, well, you have to go up in a string gauge, go higher up in the string gauge, so you're a little more taut and you're not pushing it out of tune as much.
Right.
Or it could be as much as, okay, maybe you need to refret your guitar with a lower fret wire that's not as tall, that actually is better for your playing. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ways you can go about it, fixing it. But typically, though, yeah, intonation is definitely something you want to definitely learn to do yourself.
Yeah.
My typical charge for a setup is usually between $75 and $85, which includes intonation, setup as far as action, pitching the neck, there's 4 or 5 different things. But intonation is something that you need to be able to do on your own, because it will slip after a while. I would say every couple of months you're going to want to intonate your guitar,
right,
or at least check it,
right, if
you're playing it a lot. Right. So that's something you can easily do yourself, sure. and something I definitely, I'd say that's just as important as learning how to tune the guitar, stringing it right, which is a whole nother issue.
And this will alleviate a lot of frustration down the line. It's definitely. Like, because it's like tuning your guitar. It's part of tuning your guitar. Right. It really is.
No, it is. And the other thing that you learn with setting your own intonation is that every guitar intonates differently, because the scale length, the scale lengths are different.
Sure.
And also the pickup configuration affects the intonation. Like a classic example is the neck pickup on a Strat typically has a certain style string pull to it, that if you get the pickup too close to the strings, it'll actually pull it out of tune magnetically. Yeah. And that can drive you nuts, because you'll sit there and intonate it and say, well, I want an intonate, it should be fine. Then you lower the pickup down and you're like, oh. And that's something I learned the hard way as a kid. I figured out, why is it doing that? And I realized, wow, this pickup is so powerful that it's pulling these strings flat or sharp.
Yeah, well, that's why. And that doesn't happen with the humbuckers, does it?
Not typically, no. Unless they're just super, super close to the strings. But but typically it's more of a Strat thing. But I've had customers come in and like, I don't understand why my Strat won't intonate, and it sounds out of tune when I'm playing, and the pickup's too high. And you lower it down and they go, oh wow, and then they realize, why did they design it that way?
Still owe you $70?
Yeah, no, but but those are things you're going to learn on your own, though, just by messing with your guitar. You know, I mean, so it's one of those things. I tell people, don't be too afraid to just sort of get into, and mess with it, and just, I wouldn't get a Dremel tool out or a soldering iron and not know what I'm doing. But, things like that. Worst case scenario, if you adjust your pickup too low and it falls in the pickguard or something, all right, you got to take the pickguard off and put it back in.
Here's a question. When you're adjusting the truss rod, it's very important to use the right size wrench.
Oh,
because if you don't, you could strip it out pretty easily, right?
Oh,
what do you do once it's stripped? Is there a way to fix it, or
there's an expensive way to fix it. Yes.
Really? Do you replace the entire truss rod?
Well, no, you try not to do that. What you try to do is go in, depending on what end of the neck it's at.
Right.
You try to get the adjustment nut that is on the truss rod. The truss rod is actually a rod, and it's threaded on the end. Mm-hmm. Well, then there's a nut that goes on that thread. Well, usually what happens is the person will strip that nut out. Mm-hmm. You have to get that nut out of there and try to get it off and replace that. if they haven't broken the truss rod. Sometimes
Right.
the guys will tighten it so far that they just snap it right off, and when you do that, you got to replace the truss rod.
Sure.
It happens more so on basses than it does on guitars typically, that I see that come through the shop, because basses have a lot more tension, and guys will have the bass at full tension and they start tightening it, and which you don't want to do anyways. You want to slack all the strings, tighten it, then tune it back
Right.
up.
And that's true when you're intonating as well.
Yeah, typically, yes.
Yeah.
So, like I said before, truss rods are one of those things, like, you don't necessarily have to be afraid of them. The main thing is, if you're tightening it and it gets too tight, stop. That's the
Right.
biggest thing. You can always back off and loosen it, but going too far and tighten it, yeah. But getting the nut off is a big deal, and can be very expensive depending on the guitar.
It's interesting. Some of the more modern ones have those kind of cool truss rod adjusters right where the neck meets the body.
Yeah, the wheels.
Yeah, those are kind of handy, aren't they?
Yeah, they work out good. And that's, that's a design that's actually been around a long time, but they're just sort of now, for some reason, getting popular. I'm surprised they've taken that long.
Right,
actually,
you can
but-
basically just stick an Allen wrench and kind of
Yeah,
stick it in.
and what it is, it's sort of that adjusted on the fly, so you don't have to take the neck off and mess with the guitar or the action or anything.
Well, some of them you have to take the damn pick guard off just to get to.
Oh yeah, some of you got to take the pick guard off and the neck off to get
Right,
to it.
it's
So,
just
yeah.
it's like,
Yeah, it's that's all design. I don't know.
it's
I
like,
mean,
what the heck
Fender,
were they thinking?
like Leo had some great ideas, but having to take the neck off to adjust it was a little bit of a. That's why I went to the bolt truss rod and the 3-bolt later on. Actually, that was the whole reason behind that.
Okay.
Because
yeah.
people got tired of telling him, hey, we got to take the neck off to adjust it. Why can't you just do it up here? And so he was like,
Right.
oh yeah,
I
it's
think
good.
the neck off isn't as big of a deal as it sounds like, is it? But
It's not, but the main thing you have to remember with that, if you just got to make sure you get the string alignment right when you put it back on.
Sure.
So, and if you take the neck off, you are going to have to re-intonate because you're moving the neck a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I suggest if you don't have to pull the neck, don't. But if you do, then make sure the E's are
So
connected.
I forgot to tell you about my first guitar.
Yeah.
Fender Squire Bullet.
Oh yeah.
Remember those from the
course.
80s?
Of course.
It wasn't a bad, cheap little guitar.
No,
I
those
wish
were-
I had it now.
Those were actually built by Tokai. That's who made those. And yeah, those were great. They were Japanese made. And the Fender Bullet, in fact, the whole Squire line in itself in the 80s was great. I've owned, I can't remember how many I've owned of those. And they were phenomenal. They were all made by Tokai in Japan.
You know what happened was, it came originally with these kind of plasticky pickups, kind of a wannabe lace sensor, but
Yeah, right.
it wasn't.
Yeah.
And somebody just ripped all that out and stuck in one DiMarzio humbucker, but he angled it and totally missed the low E string.
Yeah, right.
So my job was to go find some plastic that was thin enough to cut into a pickguard and straighten that out.
Mount it. Yeah, right.
So I quickly got a new Strat after that, so I didn't have it too long. But I look for them now on eBay, and they're hard to find.
Actually, the Squire stuff from the 80s is actually kind of revered now, because all of us who grew up with those guitars thinking, oh, this is my first guitar, it was kind of a junker. You later realized, man, that guitar was actually pretty decent. It wasn't that bad.
Right.
And like I said, they were made by Tokai, and Tokai made good stuff. So it was one of those, all the Japanese Fender stuff was all Tokai.
I was going to say, and they quit making them in Japan a number of years ago, right? Because it seems like nowadays it's like Korea, Mexico, or the.
As far as the Fender stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, they still have a Japanese Fender line, but they don't import them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're only home market in Japan.
Okay.
So
Yeah. My next guitar was a Japanese Fender Strat, kind of that royal blue sparkle look.
Mm-hmm.
And you remember that it looked like a wannabe Kaler with the locking.
Yeah, I
nut?
remember the bitch.
You remember those things?
Yeah.
It was a weird Strat. It was.
Yeah, that was there again. That was made by Tokai. That was it had the locking trim on it, and it was sort of a pseudo wannabe Floyd Rose, but it didn't work quite as well.
No.
Yeah. And actually, those aren't bad guitars though. You can actually replace that bridge and put either a real Floyd on it, or there's a couple other Godot bridges that actually fit.
Kind of wish I had that guitar too. But
Yeah.
How it goes.
Yeah, and all those guitars, now, I mean, even the Squire Bullet, man, those are like $500 in good shape.
I was going to say that was what I did find it on
Or
eBay.
more.
It's like I'm not paying that. For
Yeah,
it,
right,
but
yeah.
I'd like one, but
Yeah.
come on.
Well, it's kind of, I was,
what price nostalgia?
right. It's like, how bad do you want it?
Right.
I guess.
So
like,
I don't know. Maybe I'll find.
There's,
it cheaper.
I always look at it like there's probably a pretty good reason you still don't have it. So.
Right. No, that's fair enough. Now the Squires have kind of changed over the years. It seems
totally.
like nowadays they come in all these different, I don't want to say flavors, but quality. Quality. Like You go to Best Buy and buy one there, you get this cheap $100 thing.
Yeah, that's the low.
And then next up is maybe $300 somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, the Squire, like the ones that I personally like, that I mean I would totally gig with them without any problem, are it's the Squire Vibe series, which is like the 50s and 60s, 70s.
I have one of their basses.
Yeah, and they're great. They're Chinese made. The only thing I would suggest on one of the guitars I would change up if I was really going to use it a lot is maybe the pots and the input jack and the switch. That's usually where they're going to cheapen out on the parts. But playability wise, fret work and finish work, they're great, and they're like $300-400.
Is it safe to say that some Squires are better than some Mexican Fenders or some of the lower?
I would say some of the Squire Vibe ones are on a par with the lower end Mexican stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say so. Okay. And even the Mexican stuff's fine too. The only thing I can say is maybe that the Mexican guitars might have a little bit better wood in them. Maybe that's stretching it, but the Chinese stuff, I don't know exactly what they're using. It's pallet wood or what, I don't know. Right. It's got 2 inches of thick finish over it. You really can't tell a lot of times. That's
true. Yeah.
But there again, I mean, I've taken a $300 Squire to gigs and played it through a decent amp, and 90% of the people ain't gonna know the difference.
They make some cool models that I don't find in the Fender. Just Squire. Right. Like I have a really nice one-piece telly that's I've never seen a Fender quite like that. And it's a Squire.
Yeah, right.
Pretty cool stuff.
They're hard to beat for the money. In fact, we in a couple of Rick Beato videos, we've done what's our favorite guitar for under $500. 9 times out of 10, it's usually the Chinese Squire Vibe series, or maybe some of the Gretsch Syncomatic stuff. Yeah. Or, so there are a couple of guitars out there that I price be damned. I don't care. They're a good guitar.
I was going to say, what would you suggest if somebody just wanted to go buy a beginner's guitar that's going to be worth keeping for a few years?
I would say, just depending on what you want, the kind of music you play, but any of the Squire Vibes series stuff, the 60s, 50s, 70s stuff is great for the money.
Vintage Vibe, is it?
Yeah, Vintage Vibe.
Yeah, I have the bass, and
it
reminds me of like the Geddy Lee Fender model.
Yeah, right. It's jazz. It's right. Block inlays.
The same weight, and it's like.
Yeah, I get a lot of those through my shop where guys, guys who play regularly, every week. That's pretty much their go-to thing because of a couple of reasons. They're not super expensive, so if something happens to it, you're not worried about it. It's kind of like a big lighter. You just go buy another one. Right. And they play good. Once they're set up, they play good. And if you put some decent, pots and pickups and stuff, they'll rival a guitar twice their price.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I'm tempted to change the pickups. That's the only thing I can.
And that's the great thing about Strats and Tellys and all that. You can put whatever in them, and it's great. So
swap it out.
Same with the basses.
What do you think about the Epiphone stuff?
The Epiphone stuff is good too.
Kind of Gibson's version of Squire.
Yeah, to me, I think Fender has them beat a little bit in the low end price range, from like the $150 to $300 range. The Epiphones to me aren't anywhere near as good as guitars as the Squires to me.
In that price range.
In that price range. Now the Epiphones in the $500 to $700 range are typically decent guitars. I see a lot of them through here, and mainly the two main things I do with those guitars for most people is they want a bone nut put on it instead of the plastic nut that they have in them, and typically it's usually pickups or pots that need to be changed. But the guitars themselves, as far as the fit and finish and the quality, are usually decent, and I would say, considering what Gibsons are going for now, as far as their low end stuff, some of the Epiphones at $500-600, even if you have to put a couple $100 into it, you're still coming out cheaper than buying the low end Gibson for $1,000 or $1,200, and you're getting a better guitar. So it's kind of that situation. But I would say though, the under 500 range, to me, the two that stick out right off the bat are the Squire Vibe series stuff. And Gretsch makes some really good ones in the Synchromatic line, which are basically Korean made and Chinese made. And they're altered themes on Gibsons, basically, and
a couple of other kind of different brands. Any thoughts on Godin?
Well, yeah. Oh, well, Godin's makes great stuff. They're Canadian.
It's not really beginner quality stuff, although they have a budget line.
They have a budget line, which is not bad at all. I think the thing with Godin's is they're well built, and usually for the money you get a lot for your money. The reason you probably don't see them quite as much is that they just don't have a presence here in America as much as maybe Canada or overseas. But I've owned many Godins personally, and they were all great guitars. And there again, that's a guitar where I kind of like, I call those sleeper guitars because most people don't look out for them. And you can find them, you know, on Reverb or eBay or something, usually fairly cheap for a good model.
I got, you know, one of their cheaper models for about $300, and I love it, man.
Yeah,
it's
that's what. There's
some pickups sound good, and it's got a nice. Everybody, oh, what a nice finish, and it's like, well, it's probably some laminate, but whatever, it looks.
Hey, whatever, but I mean, there you go. I mean, for $300-400, man, getting a good guitar, that's totally cool.
Yeah,
so.
It's like, and another brand, Parker.
Oh, sure.
Kind of the same ballpark, where they're kind of unusual looking.
Yeah. Well, and they're Parker. Typically, Parkers are a little more expensive, so they're a little higher range. But the only thing about Parker guitars that I ever had an issue with was the way, if you have to go to refret one of them, they can be kind of a bear because they're graphite fingerboards on a lot of them, and those split very easily when you have to go replace them. They can be a pain. But the rest of the guitars always were cool and typically unique. Like you said, they're a little different. You know,
they are. You know. Well, I have one that you might have saw on my Instagram page where basically it's got telly pickups.
Yeah. Right.
So it wants to be a telly.
Yeah.
But I tell you, those are the two best sounded telly pickups I've run across. It's like, you know, they put some good ones in there.
Perfect example. It's just, you know, it sounds good. It sounds good. I don't care what it looks like or what it's in. It's, hey, you know.
So yeah, but for beginners, the Squires are probably.
Yeah, I would say just something you could walk up to your local big box store and pick right off the wall and get one. The Squire vibes are pretty hard to beat for the money.
And those are in the kind of the 300-ish.
Yeah, I would say
range.
Typically I see them anywhere from like 3 to right under 500.
So don't go with the entry level Squire for 150. Spend a little
if you're
more.
good, I mean, put it this way: if you know, if you're buying it for you know, maybe a kid that's under like 15. Buy the cheaper one.
Let's see if they even stick with it.
Give it to them for 6 months. If it sits in the corner and doesn't get played, then you're at $100.
Right.
If they stick with it or they have one of those and you want to upgrade, then yeah, definitely the Squire Vibe series for sure. I've had really good luck with those guitars so far. I mean, the last 4 or 5 years, all the ones I've owned personally or ones that have come to the store or shop, they're just hard to beat.
And where's the best place to buy? Do you think online or in person?
Well, I always tell people if they can support their local store, do that. Okay. Even if they might not have all the brands you're looking at. You know, I try to keep business local if I can. Because I grew up through a small store, so you know, and I just think I like going to a store and people knowing, you know, you walk in and they're, you know, you kind of become a patron, and like, so, you know, and typically the guys behind the counter are all guitar players or musicians, and they're, you know, you can be straight up with them, like, hey, is this a piece of junk or is this actually kind of cool? I don't know, help me. Nine times out of 10, those guys are going to be like, yeah, man, this is actually really cool, or this isn't, and you know, or they might show you something that you would never expect to look at, and then like, wow, this is totally cool, you know, and get hip to something that you didn't.
Do you consider Ken Stanton kind of a local home place?
Yeah,
because that's kind of the one that I run across the most. You know,
Ken Stanton's around for a long time.
My place.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, in fact, I used to, before Ken Stanton was in that building, it was Galaxy Music. I worked there for years.
Sure, yeah.
So I was there for years, and then, but no, Stan's a they're a good music store, you know, reputable, and they we usually have pretty good selection.
Much more so than Guitar Center, would you say?
Yeah, well, Guitar Center, you know, Guitar Centers, they used to be a lot better than they are now, it seems like. I think in the last 2 or 3 years, for me personally going into them, it's like, this isn't even the same store it was, you know.
And even since COVID hit. I mean, like you know, they've got like a third of the inventory they used to have.
Right. I think they're pretty much starting to focus just strictly online business is really what they want to do.
Maybe they might go belly up before long.
You know, they've been toying with that for years. I don't know. I mean, I think they eventually will. I think it'll just end up being more of the musician's friend end of what they do.
Go the way of Mars music.
Oh yeah, well.
You know, that was a good thing while it lasted, man.
It was good for 6 months until you realized that, one, you don't want to buy anything out of that store because it had been so beaten to death, or it had been sold and returned 3 times, and you know. it was one of those stores where it was a good idea in theory, but it didn't work. Yeah. And then so I think Guitar Center kind of they capitalized on that.
Learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
Did Mars grow too big too quick?
Yeah, and the biggest thing here again, when I was kind of talking about going to a small store, is the guys behind the counter, at Mars, none of them knew what they were doing. I mean, I would walk into the branches around town when they had them. You might find one guy out of 20 that would even know anything about what they were selling in that department. Yeah. Which to me is important because as far as guitars, amps, technology, any kind of PA system, I at least want to talk to somebody that one knows how to work it because, and then two, I want somebody's opinion. It's like, hey, you're around this thing, you've been selling it. What's your take on it? Right. Whereas, you got somebody behind the counter working for $8 an hour, they're not going to give a crap or whatever. They're going to well, it's just, they could be flipping a burger, they could be selling a Strat. Right. So I look at it like, I want to go someplace where at least the guys behind the counter know what they're talking about, or I think they know what they're talking about. And to me, that's part of the whole, like, I'd rather spend a little more money and go to a store like that and deal with some people that if I did have a problem with it, I could walk back in and they're not just going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Sure. They're going to be like, okay, yeah, what's going, so you're paying for that a little bit too, so I don't mind going to a local store, pay a little more money than just buying something offline, totally blind, going into buying something. Like a lot of people who bring guitars to me that have problems, half the time they're guitars that they bought offline that they couldn't see beforehand. They get the guitar, they have it a couple of months, they think everything's fine, and then they bring it in, they go, well, there's some problems with it, and then I look at it, I'm like, well, yeah, this guitar has got a bad neck, or this is, there's some major flaw here that you had nothing to do with, they just sold you a bad one, And unfortunately, at that point, it's usually past the point of them returning it, so they're kind of stuck with a guitar, right. So I tell people, if you know what you're looking at and you trust the store that you're buying off of online, that's one thing. Make sure it has a 30-day return policy. If you buy something offline, or online, I should say, and you don't know what you're looking at, take it to your local guitar repair shop or guitar shop and say, hey, can you just look this over for me and see if there's anything wrong with it, just because so I can rest at night knowing that I got a guitar that's okay. Right. If you don't know what you're looking at, it's fine. And most places will do that for you because they want your business and they know. I was always like, when I was working at shops and people would be like that, I'd be like, well, I always looked at it like, well, if my mom came in, I'd want at least the guy behind the counter not to rip her off, or at least tell her what's up, Yeah. And most stores want your business, so they're going to shoot you straight typically, Right. And so that to me is like, if you have a local shop you like going to, support them, and even if you don't buy everything from them, take your stuff there to get repaired or whatever. Just have them look at stuff because they're going to help you out either way if you patronize the place long enough,
Sure.
So, but definitely if you're buying online, be wary of that. So,
okay.
That's the only thing with buying online. And even like, I pride myself in knowing what knowing what I know and everything. But even I've bought guitars that had problems, and I was like, you couldn't see online. Okay.
Sure, you just don't
so
know.
It's just one of those things. It's so if you can buy it in hand, that's the way to go. Yeah.
So how about amps? Any thoughts on the modeling stuff, and has it gotten better in the last 10 years?
Yeah, as far as the modeling amps, definitely. Started with the early line 6 stuff,
Yeah, I had the Axis
pods and Axis and Spider amps and all that stuff.
$1,000.
Yeah, and whatever, they did what they did and they were good for the time. But no, the modeling has come quite far from even in the last 5 years. Some of my favorites, in fact, one of my favorite amps that most people didn't believe until they hear the amp is Fender's new Tone Master Series Deluxe Reverb. It's completely solid state, digital, looks like a Blackface 65 Deluxe until you pick it up and it weighs nothing, and you flip it around and there's no tubes in it, but it sounds like a Deluxe Reverb.
Very cool.
Yeah. And it has a lot more features in it, like a direct out, effects loop. There's a watt dampening feature. You can kick it down to 1 watt. Those amps, as far as modeling, are phenomenal. And even just in the weight alone, when you pick it up, it's like, you got a real one. It's like, hey, this is 40 pounds. This is like literally 15, 20.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And those amps are very shockingly amazing.
I picked up a rather cheap Fender that was like that about a year ago. Have you seen the ones where the face, it's kind of curved as it's coming around?
Yeah. The Mustangs.
Yeah, the Mustang.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I had one of those as a practice amp. They're great.
Yeah. That's my little practice amp now. It's cool. You could Bluetooth into it and play along with stuff.
Yeah.
It's got
all of that technology's come, like I said, with the last 5 years has really gotten great, especially, and then if you go higher up like the Kemper and all that kind of stuff, that's, even more so. But yeah, the modeling amps now, I don't really have a hesitation with telling people that those are good choices, because for the most part, most people who are playing gigs out don't play high volume gigs anymore.
All right.
So you're not going to walk in and crank, like you used to.
Well, that's what I've found. It's like when I'm just playing in kind of a trio without a drummer, it's great.
Yeah.
But you try and go into a more rock kind of setting, and it kind of gets lost in the mix.
Well, that's like what I was saying with the Tone Master Series Fenders. I took one of those amps out and played 3 or 4 gigs with them with a full drum, flat out like I normally would.
Right.
Couldn't tell the difference. In fact, I had guys come up to me and say, "Man, that's an amazing sound in blackface. What'd you do to it?" And I'd flip it around and they just look at me like, "What?" Yeah. So that series, they've really perfected that. It moves air like a real amp. It feels like the attack is right. I highly suggest go and check one of those out, because you will be like, you hate to admit it, but you're like, you know what? I can't really tell the difference between that and a real one. And to me, that's where they're getting it right.
Right. Well, I'm no purist. The idea of it is great. If it's really going to have the sound that is convincing.
Yeah. And we did a video on Rick's channel about that amp. Because it was I was so impressed with it, and I showed Rhett and Rick, and they were like, "Man, this is like really cool."
It'd be interesting to hear like a side-by-side comparison where blindfolded.
Rhett did one.
Pepsi challenge.
Oh no, Rhett did one. He did a 68 version and a 65 version. I'm telling you, as a vintage snob, there is so little difference between them that you might do a speaker change if you really wanted to get down to brass tacks with some things, but. I did almost a half a dozen gigs on one because I didn't believe it. I was like, as soon as the drummer kicks in, this amp is going to go away.
Right.
And it didn't. It held right up with it. And honestly, it was 2 features that were actually better than the real thing. The effects loop worked great, and because I used some delays and stuff.
So you weren't using any built-in effects?
No, this amp is strictly, it's set up just like basically a 65 Blackface Deluxe.
So none of those effects are built in.
They have reverb, which is a digital reverb in it, but it sounds like a spring reverb.
Okay.
And the only other thing in it, it's not really an effect, but is the wattage dampening feature, where you can kick it down to 1 watt all the way to 35 or whatever, or 25.
Yeah.
It's a great amp, and they really perfected it. And I think it's even going to get better as time goes along. Hopefully, they don't screw it up and go the opposite direction. But
stranger things happen.
Well, I will say, if that happens, this series amps are going to they'll go through the roof, because people will be like, "Man, I want that amp," and they don't make it anymore. So
exactly.
I think the best thing about that whole technology end of it, though, is I hope they keep doing it and getting to the point that it's like that, because it's less reliant on actually having to use tubes, because tubes are extremely expensive to make. They're not environmentally that great, and it's just one of those things where it's really nice to like not have to deal with tubes.
I know. It's like every tube amp I've ever had, it seems like it's good to go for about 6 months, and then you start hearing that kind of bacon frying off in the distance sound.
Or you get the ping, or you get the overtones that sound weird, and they start to get
exactly. I have a Blues Deluxe that I bought maybe 7 years ago, and I swear that thing has been more dependable than any tube amp I've ever had.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I was playing at the Inman Park Festival 3 or 4 years ago, and it was one of these portable stages that almost buckled when you walked on them.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy that was setting it up to put it at an angle and stuck something under it to kind of make it kind of
jimmy it. Yeah.
And he walked by it, and the whole stage buckled, and it literally did a backflip right off the stage and landed on one end.
Yeah.
And I wanted to throttle him, but I was like, as long as it works, you're okay.
Yeah, it still works.
But if you you mess up my gig, it's showtime in 5 minutes.
Yeah, right.
You better find a replacement. And I turned it on to work great. It's like, I think you're in for the long haul with me if you could handle this.
Well, and that's true. I mean, I'll tell you an amp that if as far as renting back, having to use backline equipment, man, give me a Hot Rod Deluxe any day.
Oh yeah, those are always good.
They always turn on. They always work. They might not sound the best, but if you know how to tweak them and you got a couple pedals, I can always get something out of them. Yeah. They're bulletproof. So the Hot Rod series and like the DeVilles and stuff. Those are great multi-purpose amps. That, no matter what you do, it seems like they always.
And I just want a good, clean tone. Everything else is pedals.
Right.
So just as long as that's good, then I'm good to go.
Right.
And I used to have a twin before that, but man, I got tired of hauling that thing.
And what's great is they actually make a twin now in the Tone Master series that's like literally 20 pounds.
That's nice. You know what I did is I put those Neo speakers in it.
Yeah, that's what's in these.
And that dropped the weight of it by 20 pounds. It was still pretty damn heavy. But and I like those speakers. I thought they sounded
they're good. They're actually. They're very transparent.
It's like the magnet's much smaller, so that it's a lot less heavy.
Right.
And those big magnets, that's 5 pounds at least.
You feel it at 2 a.m. Yeah.
Yeah, you sure do. Absolutely. It's none of the, and they jokingly put a handle on the top as if you're just going to carry it with one hand.
Well, that's your roadie's job.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Guitar players don't need to care about that.
Yeah. So. You have an amazing guitar collection, and you set aside a few guitars to show.
Yeah, I brought
today.
a few. I couldn't bring them all, but I brought a few crazy ones.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to think. Whatever. We'll pull some up here. This is one of my main Les Pauls that I've had for a little while. It's it's basically what they call a black burst. It's just it's a flame top standard, but it's all black. And you can kind of see it in this light. It's actually got like sort of a red hue to it. A little bit.
Yeah.
And this is actually built by one of my friends out in California. It's Mission Customs. So it's a replica, but it's a dead off knockoff. You can't.
Wow, I never would have known.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
That's awesome.
And so and this one's got like a sort of a 58 style neck on it. It's a little chunkier and it's more of a 57, 58 spec. So. And it's 2-piece maple top, single piece mahogany body, 1-piece mahogany neck, 50 specs, basically. Only thing I've done to that one is I put some locking Grovers on it. I put a bone nut on it, and the pickups are actually custom run PAFs that they're kind of done to my specs on at least on this set, and it's they're kind of a sort of a hotter PAF and a bridge, and the neck pickup is a little bit underwound, so it's a good mix. And,
nice.
So.
And you got the old-fashioned knobs on here. The
bonnet knobs. Yeah.
Bonnet. Okay.
Yeah, those are and the dish top in that one. That one's really. It's got a Brazilian rosewood fingerboard, so all the wood in that one is actually really old wood, so it's not new stuff, which is the lure of that guitar is pretty much all the wood was old, And Scott does a great job on stuff. He's one of my favorite builders in the country. He does all kinds of different stuff. He just doesn't do replica stuff. He does other stuff too.
And you skip the pick guard.
I took it off.
That's my preference too.
Yeah, some guitars I have some of my Les Pauls I leave them on. Some of them I take it off. It kind of depends on the guitar actually.
Well, eventually you kind of start to.
The wear through.
Wears it away.
Yeah, you get a little bit of that.
But it's a small price to pay to look cool.
Yeah, I'm like, man. To me, I'm like, play it. If you're gonna,
Well, I took mine off probably the first year I had it because it seemed like it always kind of rattled a little bit.
Yeah, and they kind of get in the way sometimes depending on how you're picking it.
Yeah, and then I saw a slash and it's like, hey, that looks really good without a pick guard.
Right. Yeah, so he kind of got him brought that back as far as taking him off.
I think so. Yeah.
And actually, it was what's funny with the guitar that he used, that he did all the Appetite stuff with, wasn't even a Gibson. It was a replica.
Oh.
And so it's great because he brought the Les Paul back, but it really wasn't even a Gibson he was playing.
That's
interesting.
interesting.
It was built by a guy named Chris Derrick, who I actually owned. It's crazy. I actually owned the guitar that was built before Slashes. Slashes was like number 607. I actually had 606 for a long time.
Very cool.
And Derrick, he built I think roughly he built probably maybe around 25, 30 guitars, Les Pauls, replicas, and they were phenomenal. They're like that. They're really close in feel and sound, and they got really old wood in them and stuff. Yeah. And but yeah, the Derrick he had didn't have a guard on it, yeah. So he bought it that way.
Well, it's interesting how quickly people's taste changed overnight once he started playing that. Because before that, it was all about a Strat style, not a Strat, but usually a Strat-shaped guitar.
Yeah, no,
with
super
one
Strat.
Humbucker and Floyd Rose.
Floyd Rose, humbucker, 2 singles, or something
it's like you probably could get Les Pauls pretty cheaply back then.
Well, yeah, nobody was really using them. I remember during that time, even in the vintage market, everybody wanted a Strat. Les Pauls were hard to get, sell.
Yeah.
Which, the diehard guys were like, well, I'm buying a Les Paul no matter what. But but a lot of people were kind of like, yeah, I don't really want a Les Paul, I want a Strat. So Strats went through the roof, like around 88, 89. That was, especially in the vintage market, man, you could buy a real Sunburst 50s Les Paul for almost the same amount of money as a custom color Strat at the time, which now is completely different. But it was the case. I remember selling a couple of really oddball, like a foam green Strat, a 64 Strat, for at the time, which was a lot of money, was like around $4,500. You could buy a real Sunburst for that.
Oh yeah.
For not much more, you know. So there was a time period where it was really like, man, this is way off. But and then of course it swung the other way.
Right.
As soon as Slash came by, then it all went to Les Paul.
Right.
So but it's interesting how one guy can totally change a market overnight. Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, it's pretty. It's and that's usually how it goes. It's always all the styles of guitars. It always swings that way. Who's on front cover guitar player? What are they playing? And
Right. Did you see an uptick in people buying a lot of kind of cheap old guitars once the grunge era came along?
I didn't see it necessarily. What I saw in that age was more of people buying Jaguars and Duosonics and all the stuff like Dinosaur Jr. and Nirvana and all those. What they were playing, and basically they were playing those guitars because you could buy all those guitars for $200 or $300.
Right.
So they couldn't afford a Strat or a Tele, so what's the next thing I can get? A Fender, a Jaguar, or whatever, and they started playing music on those guitars that weren't indicative to those guitars. A Jaguar was a surf guitar originally, and then you got these guys, playing grunge through it and playing, high distortion, and everybody found out like, oh wow, I can actually use those for that. Oh, okay. And so those kind of started going in the favor. But yeah, there was the whole time the grunge. I think really what I saw in the cheaper guitars that went through the roof is when Jack White started doing his stuff with Supros,
White Stripes,
and Silver Tones and that kind of stuff. All of that went through the roof after that, because you couldn't give Supros away.
White Stripes, Black Keys too.
Yep, Black Keys. And the Silver Tones, Dan Electros, all that, you couldn't give them away. They were cheap as hell. As soon as those guys started playing them overnight, they went from $200-$300 to like $1,200.
That's insane.
Yeah, and they've stayed that way actually. So
it's like
like I said, just takes one guy and one magazine cover, and that's pretty much
Silver Tone is basically Sears's version of the Dan Electro, or very similar.
Some of the models, yes.
The Masonite kind of body.
Yeah, the 50 when they first started out, 50s was Silver Tone, and it was Sears's in-house brand.
And that was the one that came with the amp built into the guitar case, right?
In the 60s, some of them did,
That's so bizarre. But
it's the amp in the case, yeah. No, those are cool. Those are always interesting, ideas. The Dan Electro stuff was, it was very ingenious on a lot of levels, because you basically had a guitar made of cardboard, Masonite,
right?
But they do have a certain sound to them. They do have a certain charm to them.
I think those lipstick pickups are a lot of the sound as well, right?
Oh yeah, and they're very underwound. They're very weak. They're not very high output at all.
I mean, what if you put like regular Strat single coils on a Dan Electro? Would that make it a better sounding guitar?
Well, it would change the tone, but honestly, you would lose the charm of that guitar, because the lipstick pickups are really the biggest part of that guitar.
I'm not crazy about those. I actually had one of the 12-string Dan Electros about 10 years ago with the big metal flake. It looked like somebody's boat in the 70s. It sounded a little harsh. It's like I have a 12-string now with.
I can see that.
Strat.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I like that a lot better.
Yeah, and it's especially in a 12-string, I can definitely see it. It's crazy, because it's like you can ask him, and you'll see it all the time. One of Rick's favorite guitars is a $300 U2 Dano that's just stock.
Yeah.
He hasn't done anything to it. We didn't do anything weird to it. It's just out of the box the way it is. He's got 30 guitars, and
right.
I swear he picks that one up more than anyone. That's the first one he usually grabs.
That's funny.
And it's crazy because it's like he just goes, man, there's something about it. I don't know, it just plays really good, and he likes the tone of those pickups. He usually plays it clean. He doesn't usually use it for distorted stuff, so
right.
it's a little more of a jazz kind of mellow sound out of that guitar because they are hollow too.
Right.
So, but yeah, the Danos are crazy because originally, they were $50 guitars,
right?
Yeah. And one of those cool flukes that they sort of got it right, and now they're revered, and I see really nice examples for $2,000.
Right, of the original.
Of the originals,
right.
yes.
And then they came back in like the early '90s.
Early mid '90s.
The name and started reproducing those.
Yeah, they came back and they were made in Korea, and those were $200-$300.
Yeah.
And then they went out of business again, and then they got bought again, and now the new ones that came out, they've been out for about 10 years, maybe a little over 10 years now, is a completely different company, but they make great stuff. And in fact, the new ones I like because they actually have truss rods in them.
Okay, I was to say, and that bridge, instead, the old ones was just like a piece of wood.
Yeah, it's a piece of wood mounted just on. Yeah, just mounted on. Yeah.
Forget intonating. It's just like
it's a guessing game.
It is what it is.
Yeah, you get it close, and that's all you can
right,
do.
And with a 12-string, having an one where you could intonate all 12 strings separately.
Of course,
that's kind of a revelation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and what's funny is the original Danos, they didn't make any 12 strings in the 50s. They started late 60s, mid-late 60s, they started doing some 12s.
Yeah.
So really, the ones that are out now aren't really a reissue of anything. It's sort of just a new guitar under old name. So,
You know what I wound up with? I don't know if you've seen a brand on eBay called Cozart.
Yeah.
You ever heard of that?
Yeah.
I got a 12-string Strat from them.
That's those are Chinese, yeah.
And actually, I've never seen a guitar like it. It has this weird zebra wood top on it. It looks like a peanut butter chocolate smoothie.
Yeah.
And then the backside is more of a natural wood, and it feels almost like it's chambered.
Yeah, it might be.
And it's like $120 delivered to my front door. It's like change the pickups.
Yeah,
probably, but I like it.
Yeah.
I like it a lot better than the Dan Electro 12.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and see in that instance, that's the nice happy accent.
Right. I know. Well, you know what happened? That company was like, I just ordered a natural wood, and it's like whenever they're out of stuff, they just upgrade and give you the next most expensive thing.
Yeah.
And when I opened it up, it's like, what the hell?
Yeah, zebra wood.
And then I was like, this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Think about it. The headstock matched it too.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I've never seen anything quite like this.
Yeah, there's a whole. It's funny. A lot of those companies, like the Chinese brands, they'll have one manufacturing plant or a couple, and they literally sell under like 100 different brand names.
Oh, wow.
So like Cozart and like J. Terser and all these, it's all the same.
Cozart seemed very 5 years ago. It's like I tried to find one for a buddy 6 months ago and I couldn't find it.
And I was just going to say, what they do is it's like they come out with a new name, they sell a whole bunch under that line, and then they just change the name and go to something else.
Okay.
And that happens a lot.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of that coming through the store, the shop. It's because I'll see guitars and I go, man, this is the exact same guitar as this other one. They just changed the name on it, and they literally did. That's all they did, So,
but it's not all junk, though, is it? Some of them are.
I mean, some of them are fine. Yeah, you look at it like, okay, what you have to expect. All right, $120. I can only expect so much.
You can't expect shit.
The fact that it'll even tune and play okay. Okay, well, you're already 80% ahead of the game.
Right.
So, I look at it like you talk about any guitar that's under any guitar under $300. If you can get it to play right and sound decent, home run. Okay,
right.
So. It's got a way to look at that, But I'll see what I got. I got some
what
other
else you got over here?
This is kind of a fun one.
Okay.
And typically
Is this a Mosrite?
This is a basically it is a Mosrite. It's a Hallmark built recently. These are a company that's they pretty much do nothing but Mosrite style guitars. And this was a guitar that I'm not this flashy with guitars, But this particular guitar I really dug because as a kid I had a Ventures record that had the original red, white, and blue Bakersfield, one of these on it. So as a kid I grew up with this guitar, looking at it on an album cover, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And basically it's like the Easy Rider bell helmet, American flag color scheme.
Oh yeah, or it makes me think of Buck Owens.
All right, yeah, I was gonna say Buck Owens, Bakersfield
back in the day.
Right. And this is a new modern version of the Mosrites, which the Mosrites, they made a lot of different versions of their guitars, but the '60s ones were revered quite heavily, so they're expensive now. Nice ones like $4,000 or $5,000. Well, Hallmark came out with their version of their guitar, and you can get like one of these is nice because it's same. Honestly, it's better quality than the originals in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And these are in the like 1,000 to like 1,200 range.
I can tell. I mean, this is really nice.
Yeah, it's a great guitar. It's not cheap.
What an interesting bridge.
Yeah, the floating bridge with the roller, Bigsby style. Yeah. It's crazy.
Well, just this kind of like, instead of a saddle, it's like you're on top of this little.
They're trying to get least resistance.
Yeah, folks can see that, but
it's kind of crazy.
Close look at the bridge on here. This is kind of different, yeah.
And that one's a cool guitar because they did a limited run of this red, white, and blue, so I really dug it. And actually, it's cool. I had a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Courtney, who I did a lot of work for on some of his guitar collection, and he was nice enough one day to gift that to me, and I was totally surprised by it. I told him at one point, I said, "Man, Hallmark makes this red, white, and blue Mosrite copy," and he said, "Oh yeah, I want to get a bass," So he ordered a couple of different ones for his friends, and he actually befriended. He gifted it to me, so I owe him thanks for that one.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful.
And this one's kind of fun. I've used it on a couple of duo gigs, and really like the pickups. They're actually P90s.
Okay.
And they sound really good. They're stock, just normal. I want to say actually they're Epiphones. The same company's doing Epiphones.
Sure.
But man, they sound great. They're really warm. It's just a volume and a tone.
Really cool knobs and everything. Yeah. Everything's a little different about it.
And it's got a 0 fret, so it's a little bit. It's a total homage to the original Mosrite. They even do the M in the headstock.
So this was basically a surf guitar.
Yeah.
Early on, before Johnny Ramone made it his.
Yeah, and the other guys that actually use this, I was a big fan of, was a band called the MC5 that were out of Detroit in the late '60s, and Wayne Kramer and Fred Sonic Smith used to play them. And they, of course, at the time they had full Marshall plexi stacks, and they're playing these. It was so wrong, but it actually sounded amazing. And so I was always a fan of those guys. So and I've owned some original Mosrites. But this one, the Hallmark stuff, man, quality control on those is phenomenal, and you can look the fit and finish on it. It's great.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and it feels like quality.
Yeah, it's solid. It's
solid guitar.
It's not cheap.
Yeah.
So that one's kind of a cool.
And I like the big flake. Again, it's that.
Yeah, it's a motorboat,
70s or 70s drum kit.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Right.
Very
so
much.
I was like, so that's I kind of dubbed this one. This is the the 4th of July gig guitar.
That's a good one. Sure.
I got a couple of gigs like that. Or if I just want to come out and make some over the top statement about it, it's
Sure.
But I tell you, man, it really threw a good I've got a couple different amps that I use typically. I've got a Friedman Dirty Shirley that I play through, and I've got a Tweed Deluxe, and both that thing cranked up it sounds basically kind of like a Les Paul Special.
Oh, okay.
The P90s really sound that way. So, and it's a glued-in neck guitar, so it's very Gibson-esque.
Very nice.
So that one's kind of a fun, funky guitar, And I'm typically my collection of guitars these days is I still have some vintage stuff that I play, but most of the stuff I like a little left to center, as you see. So this is definitely left to center,
Oh yeah.
So I always look at it like I never want to have two of the same thing.
Sure.
And it's fine if if guys say, "Oh, I have 3 guitars and they're all, 2 of them are backups," and I get that. Okay. Right. I'm one of those ones. It's like I want to pick up something that's totally completely different and inspires me to play something different on it.
I get like that too. Sometimes it's I just get tired of the Gibsons and the Fenders, and it's nice to play. Yeah, you play something
crazy, and it's like, and then you appreciate, you play something like this, and then you go back to your Gibson or Fender, and you appreciate those more because they aren't this, and it works both ways.
Yeah.
So this one's kind of fun. I like this one a lot.
Oh yeah, that's really neat.
And then I've got we're talking about one of my first guitars. This is actually a this is a late 70s. It's like a 77, 78 Charvel Strat. This is what they call a pre-production or pre-pro, and this was actually made in Wayne Charvel's garage out of parts. So this is when he was working out of his garage, and he would buy parts from like Schecter and Mighty Might and Seymour Duncan, DiMarzio, and if he couldn't buy it, he would make it himself. You know, so this one actually is a Schecter body with one of his necks on it. And it's got all brass hardware in it. There's a Charvel bridge. And I've had this guitar. This was the guitar that I got in pieces as a kid. And so it's now it was this guitar was actually near mint when I got it. So all of this wear is from me. It's not relic. It's not, this is real wear. This isn't faked. So this is, I tried to guesstimate how many gigs I've done on this guitar. I want to say probably, I know at least a couple of thousand, but maybe more than that. So, but all this is real. None of this is fake. This is all not, you know, this is from really smashing it like I've broken it before.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I see that. Wow.
So, yeah, that one's kind of crazy. And that's a guitar that, it's really just basically a copy of a 50s Strat. When I got it, it had a different pickguard on it. It had a brass pickguard, which I still have, that had 3 signal coils in it. And I later on I got really heavily into, I really like the 2 humbucker setup. That's kind of my favorite setup if I had to just pick one pickup configuration. And this one, again, I put the Mission custom pickups in it, so it's the same one as I have in my Black Les Paul. And they're basically just hot rodded PAFs. And that's a guitar that has had a bunch of different necks on it. I routed it for Floyd Rose at one point, then I put it back to stock. The extra switches you see on it it's basically a kill switch. That's a kill switch, just turns it on and off.
Okay.
It used to have an Olympic preamp in it, which died, and I'm rebuilding it right now.
Okay.
And it's just I just honestly just have this hooked up. This isn't even hooked up. So it's just Viam, 5-way switch or 3-way switch and 2 humbuckers.
Okay.
So it's just sort of it's like a Van Halen with a neck humbucker.
Yeah.
And that's a guitar I put stainless steel frets in.
And Robin Ford signed it?
Yeah, I had Robert Ford sign it. We did a video last year. Rick Beato did a video with him, and I helped film it. And Robin's one of my personal idols. I love him to death. And so he was there, and it's great because I showed him the guitar, figuring he would, say something about it, right? And he just kind of looked at it. He was like, yeah, cool. And I was like, well, man, would you sign it? And he's like, okay, well, you want to sign it? And I was like, well, put it back here, Yeah. And so he did it. It was cool. And but it was funny because I expected him to at least say something about it, and he didn't, which it was actually kind of cool in its own right, because it was like, well, he either totally hated it, or he was so talking about something else that he didn't even realize. He was like, okay, whatever. Yeah. So, but it was cool though. So, but that's one of the few autographs that I actually have ever gotten from somebody that I really liked. I'm usually not that fanboy of sign this, especially on guitars, because I always hate signatures on guitars, because it tends to be sort of, it's either across the front of the guitar and it ruins it for me, or I want it out of the way and just sort of, and that was sort of, I figured, okay, where can I have him sign it where it won't wear off and I'm not touching on it? I was like, all right, just the back of that sucks. That's not a big deal. So, but that's a guitar I've had since it would be 1981, and like I said, I got in pieces, and it's crazy because that guitar, the Charvel stuff has really gone through the roof as far as Strat head stock, early pre-pro guitars. Those guitars, I used to collect them. I actually had a pretty serious collection of nothing but Charvel Strat heads, as I call it, in the 80s and 90s, and most of those guitars now, I mean, even that guitar, even in that condition, it's nuts. Those are like $6-7 grand.
Do they still make Charvels now? Or?
Yeah, they're owned by Fender. Fender bought the name.
So it's not the same as it used to be, is it?
No, Charvel, Wayne has had nothing to do with the company actually since about 1982.
I remember like back in the 80s, I mean, $1,000.
Yeah,
those Jackson Charvels, like kind of like, if you couldn't afford a Jackson, you got the Charvel.
Well, and what that was after like 1983, 84, actually, yeah, 84. The name was sold to IMC, which was a company who actually owned Hondo.
Okay.
So they were made in Japan. After 81, really Wayne had nothing to do with the company. He ended up selling the name off to Grover Jackson, who used it. Later on, obviously Wayne probably regretted doing that, but what are you going to do?
Right.
He got in a bind for money, and he was trying to start another company up. He later started Wayne Guitars, which was his guitars.
Well, I remember, back in the 80s, a Jackson would run you well over $1,000.
Yeah, no, Jacksons were the boy. I mean, if you were talking about hot rod Strats, that was it.
Right, and nowadays you go to Guitar Center and they're like, you see them for like $300. It's not the same.
No, and that's the thing. Jackson and Charvel got bought by Fender, and so the high-end ones are still made in America, in California. The midline and lower lines are all made overseas. They've been that way since the mid-'80s. Yeah. And they're not bad guitars, but you just can't put them on a par with the American ones, because it's like apples and oranges. But stuff like this was still when the company was, it's just his garage. This was basically built a year before he did 80s Bumblebee guitar.
Oh, okay.
So that was built in 79. So, and a lot of the guys who played the Strat head stuff, like Alan Holsworth, he was known for playing his early Charvels.
Sure.
It was a ton of people. Gary Moore had some, and
Alan was into the old Fat Strat kind of thing for.
Yeah, he was really. Right? Yeah, he was really the guy, and it's funny because that's really why I like the double cream in the Strat was because of Holsworth.
Yeah. Well, you saw that I had that Big Apple Strat. Same thing. Yeah. And it's just like, for a guy that grew up with a Les Paul, it's just the perfect Strat,
Right, and that's kind of that was always been my favorite stuff.
And it's not your pretty little wing kind of sound, but that's okay.
No. Because I mean, you can get that out of that with no problem.
But I find it more versatile to go this direction than to, for years I tried to take a single coil guitar and make it sound like a Les Paul, and it's kind of a fruitless venture. Yeah, somebody's like, buy a rat pedal, and that helped, but it didn't really.
No, because you got to pick up this big,
right?
That you're trying to make sound like that big. It's no what you can't do.
As soon as I got the Les, it was like, okay, here's the sound I want. And then once I went back to Strats, I still wanted that sound.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I just don't find that single coil a good all around sound for what I do.
Right.
It's great for clean stuff, but
sure.
I find this is more versatile in a lot.
I just find, it's to me, it was kind of the best of both worlds, and a little, it's still not perfect, but it's as close as I've got to what I really totally.
If I had to choose between a beautiful clean tone and a really killer distorted tone, I'd go for the distorted tone.
Sure.
First, because that just kind of works more with what I play.
And this guitar over the years has been my test bed for literally probably 50, 60 different pickups.
Wow.
And I mean, it's been completely routed. Like I said, I had a Floyd Rose on it for years, and I took that off. And the guard that's on it now is a newer guard, but it's a copy of an old guard. But those pickups I actually ended up doing, I wound the specs to, or I had them wound for me with these specs, and I kind of found my favorite set as far as the output, the magnets. So, because I've always wanted a neck pickup that wasn't super muddy.
Right.
It actually still has some definition to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed to be kind of like the hurdle to get over. The bridge one was always much easier to get, I think.
Right.
But this one ended up being, I did a Alnico 2 magnet in the neck and wound it around right about 7.5K. The bridge is like 12K. With an Alnico 5 ceramic magnet for it. Sorry. On a sec. And so basically, you've got the Van Halen bridge, and you've got a really underwound neck pickup.
Okay.
And so between the two, and especially in the neck position, going between the two, I can totally get David Gilmour with that guitar in the neck position.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I do a lot of Floyd stuff live, and I'll nail it with it. And people are like, how are you getting that out of a humbucker? And I'm like, it's underwound.
Right.
So
it's not as fat.
And it's got the roundness of the Strat neck pickup, but it's got just a little more of a mid-range hump to it that it cuts better.
Yeah.
And you don't have the noise.
Sure.
So,
yeah, that's always.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was
What else you got over there? I see
Oh,
another
let me
one
see.
that kind of looks like
Let's
this.
see what other junk I've got laying around here. This one is actually, this one's a fun one. This is a, I was telling Sean before we started filming, I was like, one of the first guitars that ever got me excited about guitars in general. Front cover of Guitar Player magazine had Frank Zappa holding a burned out Strat. And I thought it was the coolest guitar ever because it had this chrome pickguard and the body was all burnt up. And I just remember staring at that thing as just for hours as a kid. I didn't even know who Frank Zappa was at that point. I mean, I just realized who he was, but had no idea. And so what I ended up doing years later, like about 3 years ago, I basically wanted to make a tribute of that Strat. And so what I ended up doing was I got a Mark Jenny body and sprayed it nitro lacquer, 3-burst lacquer. So I sprayed it, did the front and back, just in the same colors as the original. And then it was absolutely beautiful. And then I doused it with lighter fluid and burned it and tried to get as close to the one that Frank's got as I could, and which was very hard.
And I should mention the one Frank had was the guitar that Jimi Hendrix burned at Monterey and threw off the stage, right?
No, it was Astoria. It was a Miami.
Miami.
And
okay.
but it was what happened was Frank went to a Hendrix show. Hendrix smashed his guitar. His roadie at the time saw Frank there, grabbed the body and just gave it to him, and said, hey, Jimmy wants you to have this. So he said, okay, great. And he got the neck too, but the neck was smashed in half, but he did get the neck too. And so later on, Frank took the guitar, and obviously when Hendrix burned it, the original pickguard, all the plastic was melted and smashed off of it. So he just had the body and neck. So he decided he had it just on the wall as a just a piece to look at in his studio. And then one day he said, you know what, maybe I can actually use that. So he gave it to one of his guitar techs who went and at the time, which was really popular, he went and got a Schecter chrome pickguard, which is actually real metal. It's not like plastic, and it's actually really polished brass chrome plated. And put telly dome knobs on it. And then the one that Frank actually has a preamp built into this wing of the guitar right here with a knob and a couple of mini switches, which I'm actually going to do to this guitar, but I haven't gotten that far yet. I'm building the preamp, so I haven't been able to mount it yet, but that eventually it will have that.
Okay.
And this was just a guitar that I always wanted to do, and I've built a lot of other stuff. I built a lot of Van Halen replicas as far as back as the early 90s. I've done a lot of other tribute guitars, but this was one that I never did, and I always wanted to. And so one day I just got so fed up, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to order a body. So at the time, some of my other tributes, I've actually built the bodies and necks myself. This one I didn't because I knew Mark Jenny made some really nice bodies, and so I just called him up and said, hey, I want a one-piece alder body, and just something with some really straight grain, and I knew he had some nice one-piece bodies, so I just said, hey, send me one,
Yeah.
So it was just natural, and then I sprayed it. Like I said, I used nitro, 3-tone burst. This is like a late 68, 69 style burst, and then I burned it like an idiot. And so that one's a cool guitar. And that one actually has a Wormuth neck on it that I spec'd out, and I did put the decal on it and all that, and I did the frets and all that. It was a plain neck when I got it, but and that one's it's just it was built to be just sort of fun, and it's one of the few Strats that I have that actually has just single coils in it. So I actually do use that guitar for my single coil guitar.
Okay. Well, I love a chrome pickguard. I always thought those were pretty cool looking.
Yeah, it took me a long time to assemble all parts for that because those guards are actually very rare to find.
Really? No.
And they bring a lot of money. I mean, that guitar, I mean, just the chrome guard and that chrome Charvel bridge and those pickups is about $1,500 worth of parts.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's right. I mean, if you I look at it like if I'm going to do a tribute, I want to use the right parts and as much as the original stuff as I can find typically.
Right.
So one of the reasons why I really haven't mounted the preamp in that guard yet is because I haven't decided whether I really want to cut that guard up. because
Oh,
it's like, I mean, really, it's a $200 guard, and I'm debating on whether I should really drill it out or not. But ultimately, I'm probably going to have to because it's a tribute. So
Yeah.
Dweezil currently has his dad's guitar like this, and you can look on. There's a really good video where he went to Norm's Rare Guitars in LA, brings the guitar and he shows it to Norm, and he goes through the whole thing. And Fender basically put the guitar back to where it was, as that it was on the cover of the guitar of the magazine. In lieu of, they didn't put the decal up front here; they put it on the back of the headstock. And they kind of did a few other.
So they went back to the single coils, got rid of the humbuckers.
Yep, and they actually they got one of Frank's techs who worked on the guitar to do the preamp in it, like his.
Okay.
So Dweezil basically, the guitar's been rebuilt like 5 or 6 times. Okay, basically it's just a body, and they've had different necks on it, different pickups through the years. And the original, it's been completely routed under the guard. It's totally hollow. I mean, Frank put all kinds of different humbuckers in it. He didn't care. He was just routing it for way. He was a tool, you know. He didn't care. And so when Dweezil found it, it was, you know, without a neck, and so Dweezil had it rebuilt once in the late 80s, early 90s by Fender. But he put a tortoiseshell pickguard on it, put different pickups in it, had a maple neck on it, but had reverse headstock because he said, well, Jimmy owned it, it'd be kind of cool, maybe it had a reverse headstock. Yeah. So he kind of did one version of that. He had it for a while. Then people were kind of like, no, you need to make it like it looked like the cover on Guitar Player in '77 when your dad had it. So he finally went, okay,
Isn't that the one where he's kind of holding it like this?
He's doing one like that, and then he's got the one. There's a few different shots of him with it, and but it's funny. So even Dweezil at the point, he said, I had to put it back because everybody was like, they were looking at, why does it have a tortoiseshell pickguard and this weird neck? He was like, all right, so he gave it back to Fender, and they redid it, and basically just did this. So I was in the. It's funny. I guess I was in the right frame of mind because I had done this before he actually had brought that guitar back out with it being redone. So it was one of those like, well, I want to have it to where mine looks like Frank's old guitar.
Sure.
So and then I think he had to do anyways because so many people hounded him about it. I think he probably just said, all right, I'll put it back the way it is.
Back the way it was.
Yeah. So. And that's a really cool video. If you're interested at all, look up the Norm's video. It's great. He goes into great detail about it, and it's interesting because it was Jimmy's guitar, and then it was Zappa's guitar, and then Adrian Belew played it. Steve Vai played it. Mike Mealy. Everybody that went through Zappa's band basically got to use this guitar in various stages of however it was together. So it's had a crazy life. I mean, it's pretty amazing how many great guitar players have just played this one body that was,
Well, sure, and it's like Frank has so many iconic guitars, but that one's kind of maybe the most famous of them all in some ways.
In some ways, definitely. I know for me, I think of him. There's only the SG and this, and those were the two ones that always stick out in my mind. And then later on, he had the
Les Paul.
The Les Paul Custom, and some of the performance-built Strats, but yeah, the SG and this were like the iconic, like that's like the the mid '70s stuff, So this was a fun build, and I every once in a while, I love working on people's stuff, but I never get to work on my own stuff. So this was like the labor of love project where I got so fed up one week. I was like, you know what, I'm taking 3 days. I'm building this damn guitar, and I just did, and it came out great. And I've got to use it to some gigs, and there's always one guy usually at a gig where they go, man, that's like Zappa's, isn't it? And it's like you get the one cool guy in the audience going, yeah, dude, and he's like, oh man, it's awesome,
That's right.
So it's
Everybody else is like, what happened to your
guitar?
guitar?
I get people all the time. They go, "Oh my God, you need to refinish that. That's awful."
To paint that thing, right?
It's like if they only knew how much I went through just to get that.
Just get it to look that way. And I see is that a Hamer?
Actually, no, that's a customer's guitar. But I got something else that I actually need to pull out.
Okay, because I was gonna say that.
Oh,
it doesn't really look like you, but
no.
But
I did this guitar.
Rick Nielsen,
Yeah. Well, I do have a checkerboard Explorer, but I don't have it here. But this is a guitar that I guarantee you will never see. You probably don't even know what it is. But
well, this reminds me of an Ibanez.
Okay.
That.
Yeah, the Ibanez artist.
That Andy Partridge used, Mike Rutherford from Genesis.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's now kind of in that ballpark.
Yeah. Well, yes. This is actually what they call. This is called a Worthington. Mm-hmm. This was a guitar that was made in 1979. There was only 10 of them built, And what it is, it's a double cut Les Paul. So it's basically a 59 Les Paul Sunburst, but with 2 cutaways in it. Now, Ibanez did have Ibanez artist guitars that came out in '75 that had double cutaways.
Right.
They were a lot different than this, but the same sort of basic shape.
Those were good guitars.
Oh, they're great guitars. In fact, I love '70s Ibanez stuff. They're some of my favorite guitars, actually, as far as just Japanese stuff.
Right.
This guitar is kind of interesting, though, because this was a guitar that these were hand built by a guy named Rich Worthington in St. Louis. They were commissioned by a guy named Ed Seelig, who put his name on the headstock. He had a store in a vintage shop in St. Louis in the late '70s, early '80s, called Silver String Guitars. And he commissioned this guitar, Ed Seelig did, to a guy named Worthington, who was a custom guitar builder at the time. And what it was, they wanted a double cut Les Paul. And so what's really cool about this guitar is, first of all, I've owned this guitar since I was basically 14. I ordered it. The original guy, Ed Seelig, who had the shop, had this small ad in the back of Guitar Player magazine, and there was a picture with him with his double cut Les Paul, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And at the time, Gary Richrath of REO Speedwagon was playing these. He had 2 of them, or actually he had 4 of them, but 2 at the time. And I remember seeing a video on MTV in like 1981 of him playing this double cut Les Paul, and I'm like, it's like a Gibson, but it's a double cut. I don't know what, I couldn't figure out what. I knew it wasn't an Ibanez because it was different in appointments and pickups and all.
Right. The Ibanez has more of a curved top on it.
Curved top. It's got like the German curve edging.
Yeah.
The headstock's completely different. It's just a totally different guitar. And so I saw Rich Rath playing one of these, and I couldn't figure out what it was until I saw this little tiny ad in the back of Guitar Player magazine. And I was like, oh man, that's the guitar that he's playing, I think. So I had, at the time, my dad called the shop, and because he was interested in it too. He said, "Hey, what's the deal with these double cut Les Pauls you got?" He said, "Oh, well, I'm doing a series. We're doing double cuts, and they're all custom order, and you can get, what kind of inlays, the neck shape, all that kind of stuff." So we ordered the guitar at the time. I didn't know he ordered. My dad ordered for my birthday, and it was a complete surprise.
Nice.
But it was like a year later till we got it, because he had to build it.
Right.
But originally, Gary Richrath had some, Joe Walsh had one, Nancy Wilson had one, Howard Leese had one. There was, like I said, Gary Richrath had 4 of them. And so out of the complete series of the 10 or 12 that were built, there's only like 2 or 3 that weren't made for like some big rock star.
Okay.
And this is one of them. And this is actually the last one built. It's pretty crazy. It says it's number 19, but there was only, he built 19 guitars. Basically, like 9 of them were bad. He had problems with like truss rods and all kinds of different stuff, bad wood and things. So really, there's only 9 that actually got produced that were like good enough quality that he could sell them. And this particular one is the last one built. And it kind of differs from some of the other ones where this one's got green abalone inlays instead of pearl. And this guitar it's kind of unique in the fact that it's about 2 years later, Gibson actually produced this very guitar. Except they put an Explorer headstock on it, and it was called an XLP.
I remember those. I had a friend that had one. That had like a single coil.
They made some with single coils and a Kaler. And they were, and then they had some that were just 2 humbucker, but they actually copied this guitar basically, and just put a different headstock.
It never felt much like a Les Paul to me.
Well, no, and it wasn't. And honestly, this guitar, it was never designed to be that way. This guitar was.
It kind of feels like it.
Yeah,
it's got about as much weight.
Yeah, the Worthingtons definitely did.
Yeah.
The Gibson ones were not quite as cool.
Yeah.
But what's cool about this guitar for me is that it's one that it's such a limited guitar. There was very few made. All the people who owned them were basically, except for me, Ed Seelig, who has the prototype, and 1 or 2 others that actually got sold out of the store that were completed. I feel like this was probably like the only one that didn't go to somebody who had a huge name. So it's kind of cool that most of those guitars 2 of them are in their Hard Rock Cafe, like Joe Walsh's and Nancy Wilson's are hanging up in Hard Rock. So they're not getting played. There you go. And that's actually the tour that he was using this on. So, yeah. So it was like, I have a great affinity for Joe Walsh because I'm from Ohio originally, and he's from Toledo, and I was a huge James Gang fan, and like one of my favorite records is his The Smoke You Drink, the Player You Get, which was a great record in the mid-'70s. Yeah. So it was kind of cool. So I actually have a picture of Joe Walsh with his, and it's the same guitar, except his doesn't have the same inlays. I've actually got nicer inlays, which is kind of cool. So this is kind of a neat guitar, and it's a one-off piece. And what's really crazy is I had the guitar stolen from me, and it was gone for 20 years. And I got it back.
That's wild.
So what's really strange is that all of the wear you see on that guitar, I didn't do any of it.
Yeah.
That was somebody played the crap out of it.
A whole lot.
It was played so
considered.
Yeah, no, but I had to rebuild the whole guitar. It was that guitar. The frets were completely worn flat. Had a cracked nut. The pickups weren't working. It had so much dirt and crap of it, you couldn't even barely see the flame in it. I took the entire guitar apart, rebuffed it. I mean, I had to rebuild the whole guitar. So whoever had it, I loved it, or the many owners that had it, somebody loved
played
it
to death.
Yeah. And so I ended up, like I said, I had to refret. I put 6100 frets in it and redid all of it. And,
does this binding come in like a roll or something, or what?
Yeah, well, yeah, you can get it cut as that. Yes.
Well, although I just always wondered, it seems like such a weird thing to have to pry off and replace. You know, it's like kind of tricky, I would think.
Well, when I do a refret, I don't pull the binding.
No. Okay.
No, yeah, it's
And but, I mean, there are times that you've replaced the binding completely, though, right?
Yeah, if it's broken or cracked or missing pieces or something. Yeah, right. Typically. I try not to mess with it too much though, because binding work is very tedious work. I mean, I can do it, but it's one of those things where it's very time consuming and it's expensive. So
right.
I try not to mess with binding unless I have to.
Yeah, well, it's almost it's more for licks than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, on a Gibson like this though, unfortunately, when you pull the binding, there's a whole channel that runs all the way down the neck. Yeah, so you have to have binding on because you're going to feel this channel.
Sure.
So you can't. You have to have it on there. Right. So. But yeah, it comes in a roll, or it gets cut that way, or strips.
Yeah, I was kind of wondered about that. Yeah.
And the other cool thing about this guitar is I really like is that it's pre-PRS. So PRS was making guitars in his garage during this period, but this you have to realize that during that time you basically had Gibson, Fender, you may have had Dean, and you had a couple other make Charvel, and that was it. Yeah. You didn't have 400 guitar companies or guys in their garage making guitars. So this was like, to have a custom built guitar that wasn't Gibson or Fender or something was, one, you had to find a guy that was good enough to do it, and then two, come up with some cool designs that actually made sense.
Speaking of PRS, last night I was interviewing.
Is that it?
Is that it?
I don't know.
I think my battery's probably going to shit.
Oh.
So we'll have to wrap it up pretty quick, but we're good to go.
Okay.
I was chatting with Stan Whitaker from Happy the Man, which is a late 70s prog band that's not really well known. He's one of the first PRS users. Like he had a double neck built for him back in the 70s by Paul.
I was an early PRS guy too. In '82 I had number 11, man. Yeah. And with the old body style like Santana. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How do you feel about those? Do you feel like
those guitars
changed in quality over the years?
Oh, definitely, yeah. The original hand-built ones, those are highly revered because they are phenomenal guitars. I mean, he still makes phenomenal guitars, don't get me wrong. In fact, if I'm going to buy a new guitar, it's either a PRS or it's a Sura or maybe an Anderson.
That's cool. I just never really got on with them personally. It feels like they're neither here or there. It's kind of like
they're an acquired taste,
living somewhere between the Strat and the Les Paul, but never really copying either one.
They are now. The original ones like Santana had were much more just this double cutaway Les Paul.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was basically a Les Paul, but it had a Strat tremolo on it.
It's like I wanted one for so many years, and then when I went to get it, it's just like I'm not paying $2,500 for this guitar. It is not worth it.
Well, and they are, like I said, they are an acquired taste. I mean, I know people that just absolutely won't play anything else but those, and then I know guys that are like you are like, I tried it, I really just didn't get on with it.
I have a friend that has one that is nicer than any other one I've ever played. It's almost like if I could find one that felt like this, I might play it. But
the good thing about PRS, and I will say this hands down from working on hundreds of them, 90% of the ones that come through here that are American made, that are middle to upper end, typically play pretty flawlessly.
Okay.
Like the fretwork is phenomenal. The woods are great. Fit and finish is great.
What do you think of their budget ones made in Indonesia?
The budget ones are hit and miss, but I've had some really great ones and I've seen some really bad ones. Yeah. So it's like anything. I will say for the money, some of the SCs are great guitars for the money. For $700-800 or $1,000.
Not bad.
They're hard to beat.
Yeah.
But it's like anything. You just got to find one that's decent. You got to go through some of them. You know? So.
Did you see that double neck he built for McLaughlin when he did the Mahavishnu?
Yeah.
Wow, beautiful.
Well, and what's really cool is McLaughlin had the Rex Bogue. That's so really to me, that was PRS's tribute. Yeah.
A friend of mine was there when that happened.
Yeah.
Producer friend of mine.
Yeah.
Split right in half.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is Ibanez made a copy of those.
They did. Denny Lane with Wings.
And there's like I think there's 12 of them. I actually owned one. Wow. Yeah, I owned one for.
I saw one in person once. Yeah. And it's hard to tell the difference.
They're almost identical. In fact, what Ibanez did was McLaughlin played a tour in Japan. They went to his show and took detailed photos and literally just built it out of the photos. Yeah. So I had one. It's called Twin 12, and they're the heavist guitar. Mine was 17 pounds.
Double necks are just people think, oh, this looks so cool, but it's ergonomically they're tough. You know, because it's like basically, I always thought that someone should create. Well, Stan from Happy the Man, I'm like, what'd you do? He's like, well, Paul hollowed it out and we filled 2 cavities with lead to counterbalance it.
Yeah, right.
And that's really the thing. It's like, I used to think...
Neck dive. It just goes right to the floor.
Well, it's like 20 pounds of machine heads, you know? And so I used to think, oh, Jimmy Page looks so cool leaning back. Now I know why.
You know why he did it.
Yeah, you had to.
You have to.
The thing is, you don't play your best when you're trying to balance something,
No, not at all. Especially when you have your left hand propping the guitar up.
Yeah, I mean, that just doesn't inspire great playing.
No, not at all.
But you get it balanced. What I did is I took a Crown Royal bag and filled it with buckshot and tied it on
the strap.
Strap. Because I have an Epiphone and I use it occasionally when we have a Led Zeppelin jam or whatever to play Song Remains the Same. Because, it's an eye catcher. Everybody sees that. And
it's the law. Come on.
Right, yeah. I mean, what else is it good for?
Right, exactly.
Birds of
Hotel
Fire.
California now.
Birds of Fire.
Yeah, right.
That kind of stuff. Who's going to...
Yeah.
Play that at a bar. Not likely.
Yeah, right.
Not likely.
Yeah, right.
But
yeah.
Well, I guess we should probably wrap it up before my battery takes a dump. Because it won't be long. But Dave Onorato, my pleasure chatting guitars with you today, brother.
Yeah, man.
Let's do it again sometime.
No problem. You're always welcome here, and I'm always here. So hey,
That sounds great.
And if you guys got questions, send them some questions, and I'll be happy to answer anything if I can.
Yeah, that sounds great. Alrighty then.
Cool.
All right. Well, I will be back next. I think next week I have the weekend off for the first time of the year.
Jeez, man.
So I might find another show. I'm working on. I'm going to be chatting with the guys from Styx coming up.
Cool.
Sometime in the next couple of weeks, they have a new album called Crash of the Crown.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Kind of epic style stuff. The track I heard on it sounded more like Queen than Styx, but. It's not much of a stretch.
Yeah, right.
Really, vocally, those harmonies.
It's basically.
Yeah. And let me see. My friend Fernando Perdomo did a tribute to Paul McCartney's Ram album, 50th anniversary, and his good friend Denny Sywell was the drummer on the Ram album.
Yeah.
So he's on the tribute. So Denny and Fernando are going to drop by the week of the 22nd and chat about that. And then I think you saw I'm going to chat with Phil Manzanera.
Yeah, I did see that. I'm a big Roxy Music fan. So.
Oh yeah, man! Not enough people know about him. He
unfortunately was very, very underrated and sort of overshadowed by Brian Eno and Ferry, obviously.
Right. These kind of, and he's kind of one of the first textural kind of school guys. Like before
I was telling people
Andy Summers.
I was going to say the Edge the Edge totally saw him and was like, yeah, okay, I get
Yeah.
it. I'm not a lead guy, but I can do
There's
chordal stuff.
all kinds of neat stuff I can do.
And he was way ahead of the curve.
I mean, you
on
listen
that,
to some of the stuff on that Avalon album.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
like, man, that's like a textbook in how to be a textural guitarist.
Yeah, I can tell you right now, that's one of my favorite records. But two, it's just sonically. That's usually what I put on a stereo to test how good a stereo is.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's a and that's kind of a unique record for them. That was kind of a reinvention.
Oh, it was. It was not
compared
the
to
typical
the early stuff,
Yeah,
which
no.
was more almost kind of punky.
Yeah.
They were way ahead of the curve. I mean, when they arrived in '72, people must have thought they got off a spaceship.
Oh, it was like them and Bowie. I'm sure everybody was like,
Right.
Well,
It's
what
almost
is
like
this,
it's like if you want a glimpse of what the '80s are going to be like, we're laying the groundwork right now.
Yeah, the band that spawned 200 copies. It's
Exactly.
like
Because I mean, you listen to something like Duran Duran, and you can hear the
Yeah.
Roxy
Oh,
influence
big.
straight in. It's like Roxy mixed with Chic is Duran Duran.
Yeah.
I mean, well, Love is a Drug is like a Duran Duran tune before Duran Duran was
Oh
around.
yeah, no, you can tell, man. You can
Yeah,
definitely tell.
totally.
It was
So-
a lot of
so-
those bands.
So big props to Phil Manzanera.
I'm glad you did it because he's definitely a guy that needs to be more known for.
Oh,
what he did.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you got any questions, send them my way,
Yeah,
and I'll ask him.
Definitely.
Because,
Yeah.
we're definitely-
Actually, yeah. Ask him if he still got his red Firebird 7.
I think he does.
Yeah, because that guitar was so cool. I love that
think he
guitar.
does.
I actually have a Firebird
that.
1 in red, and it's
Oh,
totally
that,
because of
that
him.
is totally him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course that white Strat he had with the star inlays,
Star inlays,
and
yeah.
the big
Yep.
sunglasses that made it look like a big
Yeah.
fly, basically, big fly googly eyes
Yes.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
one of a kind. So I'm totally stoked to chat with him. And other than that, in June, I don't know who's dropping by, but I'll find somebody cool. I usually do.
I was gonna say, I forgot to say, check me out on Instagram too. I got a Dojo Guitar Repair. You can always send me questions there.
Yeah,
So.
that sounds great.
Cool.
Alrighty then. Well, we're going to wrap it up. And
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you so much, Dave.